The story begins with Felicia Earhart standing before her fiancé with a resolve that chills the air, her expression unyielding as she delivers a declaration that shatters the aristocratic composure of the room. She announces her intention to consult her father and the other family elders immediately to systematically dismantle the arrangement that binds them. With a gaze devoid of her usual warmth, she explicitly states her desire to cancel the engagement entirely. Cyrus, caught off guard by the sudden coldness radiating from the young lady who usually speaks so quietly, stammers in disbelief, his composure fracturing as he struggles to comprehend the termination of their union. 8 months prior to this fracture, the atmosphere at the Crane Academy in the Auckland Kingdom radiates with celebratory grandeur. Felicia stands on the stage of the auditorium, bathing in the accolades of the faculty for her outstanding performance at the poetry recital. The applause marks a high point in her academic life, coinciding with the achievements of Cyrus, who stands nearby in his uniform. Felicia approaches him with a gentle smile to offer her congratulations, to which Cyrus responds by praising her own victory, acknowledging the beauty of the poem she recited. He admits to a vulnerability rarely seen, confessing that his nervousness during the event reduced his memory of the triumph to a mere recollection of staring at the floor. Observers nearby marvel at the pair, cementing their reputation as a flawless couple. They view Cyrus as a prodigy of the sword, destined to shine in tournaments before royalty, while Felicia is hailed for her literary talent, with expectations that she will secure a rank in the Royal Poetry Anthology. The societal structure of the Academy reinforces this duality, as upperclassmen, gender segregation dictates their curriculum, with boys training in martial arts and strategy for the Royal Knights, and girls refining arts like sewing and poetry for the role of royal poets. Born to marquis families, their union appears perfect on paper, a match blessed by status and talent. Yet, beneath the surface of this idealized pairing, Felicia harbors a quiet dissonance, telling herself she should be happy despite the weight settling in her chest. This dissonance manifests physically in the form of Maisie Goddard, Felicia's cousin of the same age. Maisie perpetually hovers around the couple, offering apologetic whimpers about intruding on their dates while failing to actually leave. Cyrus, rather than establishing boundaries, dismisses the intrusion with a casual assurance that it is fine, validating Maisie's presence. The pattern repeats relentlessly. On what was scheduled to be their 11th private date, Maisie appears yet again, asking to join. Cyrus accepts without hesitation, leading to a carriage ride where the seating arrangement visually mocks Felicia's status. Maisie wedges herself directly in the middle, separating the engaged couple. Felicia observes this spatial usurpation with a weary resignation, noting that Maisie has successfully attached herself to every single outing they have attempted. During the ride, Cyrus directs his empathy toward the interloper, comforting Maisie about the hardships she endures. Maisie leverages her history of being bullied to elicit sympathy, claiming she simply finds joy in going out with people, expressing a hope that Cyrus will be pleased with her company. Felicia recognizes the script, noting internally that Maisie recited these exact lines during their previous encounter. The frustration of planning a proper romantic date only to have it commandeered simmers beneath Felicia's polite exterior. She attempts to diffuse the tension with light sarcasm, teasingly asking if Maisie intends to steal Cyrus away. The reaction from Cyrus is immediate and harsh, but not in the way Felicia anticipates. He recoils at the suggestion, his face darkening with disdain. He brutally disparages Maisie, labeling her as merely a baron's daughter and scoffing at the notion that he would ever look at such a plain girl. He compares the two women to night and day, dismissing Felicia's jest as an impossibility due to Maisie's inferior social and physical standing. While meant to reassure Felicia, the cruelty of his elitism strikes a discordant note, leaving Felicia stunned by his callousness rather than relieved. Later, during a tea gathering on the academy grounds, the dynamic persists. Maisie praises Felicia's recent award enthusiastically, and Cyrus echoes the sentiment, framing her success as an expectation of his fiancée. However, the conversation shifts as Maisie offers unsolicited critique, suggesting that a specific scream in Felicia's work on page 11 lacked the necessary impact and should have been phrased differently. Felicia accepts the critique with a strained smile, promising to keep it in mind. Internally, she attempts to rationalize her situation, convincing herself she is lucky to be engaged to a man who is young and handsome, contrasting her fate with other girls who are betrothed to much older men. She acknowledges the external validation of their match while confronting the internal reality that the relationship contains absolutely no love. The fragile peace fractures further when a small insect intrudes upon their picnic. Maisie reacts with a theatrical scream, prompting Cyrus to abandon his conversation and rush to her side, cooing comforts and offering her shelter. Felicia watches the display, the repetitive nature of these events solidifying her doubts. The trio's routine extends to weekends, which are invariably spent attending chapel to offer prayers. This religious observance has morphed into their standard date itinerary. Outside the church, they encounter Barney, an acquaintance. Cyrus immediately sours, launching into a tirade against the younger boy. He dismisses Barney's swordsmanship as mediocre and characterizes him as arrogant. Cyrus attributes Barney's confidence solely to his proximity to Prince Kevin, accusing him of bragging about the connection. Maisie joins the condemnation, claiming she is a fan of the prince and questioning Barney's status. Felicia, however, reaches a breaking point. Hearing Cyrus disparage Barney compels her to make a decision. She reflects on the known friendship between Barney and Prince Kevin, the second prince of the kingdom, acknowledging she hadn't realized the depth of their bond until now. Cyrus, continuing his lecture, forbids Felicia from attending Barney's upcoming party. He frames this restriction as a protective measure, citing Barney's character issues, and claiming his grumpy demeanor about parties makes him unsuitable company. Cyrus insists he speaks only out of care for Felicia, painting a picture of Barney as someone who hates being lectured by younger peers. Felicia pushes back, recounting that her father explicitly asked her to attend the party and stating she has known Barney for a long time. Maisie interjects with childish disapproval, puffing her cheeks and stating she wouldn't even speak to Barney, let alone attend his party. She accuses Felicia of being unreasonable and making her fiancé sad. Maisie escalates her rebuke, questioning if Felicia cares about Cyrus at all and demanding she show him more respect as his betrothed. Unshaken by the combined pressure, Felicia defends Barney's character. She describes him as cheerful and lively, asserting that she sees nothing wrong with him. She refuses to swallow second-hand rumors or cut ties without verifying the truth for herself. She declares her intention to believe only what she sees with her own eyes. At that precise moment, Prince Kevin descends the steps, overhearing the commotion. He asks if someone mentioned his name and notes the spat. Maisie reacts with a high-pitched squeal of excitement, while Felicia greets him formally. The prince walks past them, but not before directing a genuine smile specifically toward Felicia. This silent validation stuns her, reinforcing her intuition. Turning back to Cyrus, Felicia offers a compromise wrapped in a challenge. She admits the possibility that she could be wrong about people, citing her long history with Barney as the basis for her current stance. However, she demands that Cyrus promise to scold her as her fiancé only if she is proven wrong after the fact. The gravity of her request hangs in the air. Cyrus softens, apologizing for losing his temper. Felicia accepts the apology but notes internally that despite the truce, they remain emotional strangers. Cyrus attempts to bridge the gap, acknowledging their different values. He pledges that since they are destined to be husband and wife, he will try to meet her halfway, little by little. The moment approaches a semblance of genuine connection, a potential turning point for their relationship. However, the fragile progress is instantly obliterated. Maisie, lurking nearby, interrupts the tender atmosphere to ask if they are going on a date afterward. Without missing a beat, she asks to come along. Cyrus, defaulting to his ingrained habit, agrees immediately, telling her, "Of course you can." Felicia stares at them, the cycle of intrusion repeating instantly despite the just-spoken promises. The realization crystallizes that nothing will change, fueling the resolve that will lead her to the opening scene, the cancellation of the engagement. The domestic tranquility of the Earhart estate fractures under the shrill persistence of Maisie Goddard, who demands access to Barney's upcoming party. Felicia Earhart counters this request by reminding her cousin of her previous declarations against attending such social gatherings, exposing the contradiction in Maisie's sudden enthusiasm. This friction stems from a familial realignment. Maisie entered Felicia's life only recently, following the remarriage of Felicia's uncle. A retrospective view of their introduction reveals the calculated nature of Maisie's integration. Marquis Nicholas Earhart, Felicia's father, formally presents Maisie to his daughters, Felicia and Rosemary, instructing them to treat her as kin. Maisie immediately breaches social protocol, lunging forward to embrace Felicia with a casual familiarity that defies the rigid class structures of their society. The societal hierarchy places a formidable barrier between them. Felicia stands as the daughter of a marquis, a high-ranking noble, while Maisie is merely the daughter of a baron, a rank situated near the bottom of the aristocracy. When Felicia's father reprimands Maisie for this breach of etiquette, Maisie weaponizes her lower status, shedding tears and claiming she only wished to be friends, effectively casting herself as the victim of aristocratic snobbery. Back in the present, Maisie employs this same emotional manipulation, dismissing Felicia's valid concerns as silly fussing while maintaining a facade of innocence. Felicia observes this performance with internal exhaustion, noting that Maisie has already begged 3 times to attend, blatantly contradicting her own stated distaste for parties involving Cyrus. Maisie clasps her hands together, pleading with an intensity that borders on theatrical, claiming that her attendance is somehow tied to her father's work and therefore impossible to avoid. Felicia retreats into a sigh, mentally noting that if their roles were reversed, she would never intrude so shamelessly. She confronts the reality that Maisie now lingers in her home every single day, treating the Earhart estate as her own. The atmosphere shifts with the arrival of a maid announcing Sir Cyrus. Felicia rushes to the parlor, but her fiancé bypasses her completely, offering only a cursory acknowledgement before stating his intent to speak with Marquis Earhart. Felicia stands marginalized in her own home, realizing with a pang of bitterness that Cyrus visits her father more frequently than he takes her on dates. She attempts to eavesdrop at the door, but Cyrus catches her and snaps, ordering her to stop butting into matters she does not understand. When he sees her shock, he backpedals, claiming his harshness was merely a joke. The parlor soon hosts an even more insulting dynamic. Maisie has inserted herself into the room, lamenting to Cyrus that she feels like a stranger in her own home and has nowhere else to go. Cyrus, displaying a profound lack of awareness, asks Maisie if she plans to go out with Toby and the others the following day. Felicia watches this exchange with growing ire, aware that the household staff has begun to mistake Maisie's constant presence for a sign that she is the one Cyrus promises things to. Cyrus then pivots the conversation to Felicia, confirming her attendance at Barney's party. He uses her scheduled absence as a pretext to organize a separate social gathering, suggesting that he, Maisie, Toby, and Neil throw their own party to avoid loneliness. Maisie accepts with jubilant enthusiasm, her earlier claims of having nowhere to go vanishing instantly. Cyrus justifies this exclusion by framing it as a kindness to Maisie on a day off, completely disregarding the optics of planning a private event with his fiancé's cousin while his fiancé is elsewhere. Felicia, recognizing that objecting would paint her as narrow-minded, decides to simply endure the slight and attend Barney's party alone. The scene transitions to the Ashfield estate the following day, where Marquis Nicholas Earhart greets Edgar, the host. Edgar expresses gratitude for their attendance but voices a candid disappointment, admitting he had hoped Felicia would marry his own son rather than Cyrus. He alludes to the fact that Cyrus is marrying into the Earhart family as a son-in-law, a position that implies a complex power dynamic. Barney, the subject of Edgar's matchmaking hopes, approaches Felicia with a cheerful demeanor, congratulating her on the engagement. He immediately notes the glare he receives from Felicia's camp, attributing it to his blunt comment about Cyrus becoming a son-in-law. Barney pivots to flattery, revealing that Felicia has garnered a significant fan base, not for her social standing, but for her poetry. He playfully bumps her shoulder, accusing her of modesty when she feigns surprise. The casual atmosphere shatters with the arrival of Prince Kevin. The crowd erupts into whispers as the royal figure approaches Felicia, recognizing her from their previous encounter at the chapel. Kevin speaks with disarming sincerity, revealing that he read her work in the Royal Poetry Anthology the previous year and has been curious about her ever since. He expresses a regret that they did not meet sooner and asks her to drop the formal titles, requesting she treat him as casually as she treats Barney. Barney interrupts this intimate moment, reminding the prince that Felicia is already engaged. Kevin accepts this boundary with a laugh but clarifies his intent. He wishes to be her friend and supports her as a fan of her literature. Barney teases Felicia, noting her flushed face and accusing her of cheating with her reactions. Felicia stammers, overwhelmed by the revelation that Prince Kevin, her idol, is a fan of her work. She confesses to Barney that she has admired Kevin since watching him in the royal tournament 2 years prior. This confession leads to a discussion of a controversial match between Kevin and a fighter named Adrian. Barney recalls that Kevin lost because he hesitated to attack when Adrian's shield dropped. Public opinion attributed this hesitation to his royal status, assuming he lacked the killer instinct of a true warrior. However, Felicia offers a different interpretation. She asserts that Kevin refrained from attacking not out of weakness, but because he recognized the shield drop was a maintenance error rather than a combat mistake. She argues that if he were not a prince, He would have struck without hesitation, but his choice to spare a defenseless opponent defined his integrity. She contrasts this with Cyrus, noting that her fiancé would have attacked immediately, viewing the equipment failure as the fighter's responsibility. Kevin, who has overheard this defense, looks at Felicia with profound appreciation, validating that she sees him exactly as he is. He dispatches Barney to fetch drinks, creating a moment of privacy at the estate's gazebo. Once alone, Kevin addresses the incident at the chapel where Felicia was cornered by 4 men. He apologizes for not intervening, admitting he felt disgraceful for watching her face such odds alone. Felicia confesses that despite her outward bravery, her legs were trembling with fear. To honor her spirit, Kevin presents a rectangular gift box wrapped in elegant paper. Inside lies a high-quality fountain pen, a tool intended to encourage her to continue writing the works he so admires. He explains the symbolism of the wrapping paper, which features the Edelweiss flower. He tells her that the flower represents courage, a talisman to keep her legs from trembling in the future. He pledges his support as her friend and ally, solidifying a bond based on mutual respect. Felicia accepts the gift with overwhelming gratitude, thanking him for the dazzle he has brought into her life. When Barney returns, he finds Felicia beaming, holding the gift box. She excitedly shows him the Edelweiss motif. Barney's expression freezes as he recognizes the flower. He recalls a piece of cultural knowledge Felicia seemingly lacks. In a foreign country, when a man gifts a woman Edelweiss, it carries a specific, romantic implication. Barney looks at the unsuspecting Felicia and the retreating prince, realizing the weight of the message that was just delivered. He decides to keep this knowledge to himself, muttering that some things are better left unsaid to preserve the innocent friendship Felicia believes she has just forged. The imposing facade of the Crane Academy main building stood as a bastion of learning, its many windows reflecting the daylight as the students inside awaited the day's judgment. Inside the classroom, the tension broke with the instructor's announcement of the top poem in the class. The name called was Maisie, and as the congratulations washed over her, a distinct, smug expression settled upon her features. Nearby, Felicia froze, her eyes widening in sheer disbelief as she processed the victory of her rival, a reaction mirrored by the stunned silence of her peers. Discussions erupted immediately among the students, dissecting the merits of the winning piece. One student sought validation, insisting that Maisie's poem was genuinely good this time, while others compared it to the consistently lovely works of Rachel and Felicia. However, a consensus formed regarding a jarring discrepancy within the work. While the opening lines drew the readers in with a melancholy beauty, the second half baffled them. The students rationalized the drop in quality, speculating that Maisie must have simply been off her game as she wrote the conclusion. Rachel and her friend huddled over the manuscript, analyzing the specific stanza that garnered such praise. The opening lines painted a vivid, serene picture. The world stays the same, birds whisper, morning dew sparkles, lighting up my darkness. Rachel nodded in agreement, acknowledging the brilliance of this initial segment. However, as their eyes drifted downward, the quality plummeted into incoherence. The beautiful imagery dissolved into a mess of barely readable scrawl and nonsensical phrases, culminating in the baffling line, "Tears moisten extreme." The sheer drop in literary value left the girls stunned, questioning how such a disjointed creation defeated Felicia's work. Standing in the background, Felicia clenched her fists, her shadow stretching across the floor as she agonized over where she had gone wrong to lose against such a chaotic composition. The conversation shifted to the complex family dynamics surrounding Felicia and the victor. A classmate noted that despite the lack of a blood relation, the term "blood runs true" seemed applicable, sparking a discussion about their lineage. A detailed mental map of the family tree clarified the connections. Nicholas and Christina produced Felicia and Rosemary, while Baron Goddard and Lady Daphne produced Maisie. The only true blood-related cousin in the equation was Agnes, the daughter of Baron Goddard and his previous wife. This intricate web of remarriages and stepsisters placed Felicia and Maisie in proximity without sharing genetics, a fact Felicia rarely bothered to articulate as she felt it hardly mattered to her daily life. Determined to understand the source of Maisie's sudden poetic flair, Rachel confronted her directly. She demanded to know if Maisie had used any references for the opening scene, imploring her to explain how she crafted such a beautiful passage. Maisie, looking away with a feigned air of nonchalance, deflected the inquiry, claiming she simply didn't know and had perhaps forgotten the inspiration entirely. Rachel, undeterred by the evasion, declared her ambitious new goal. She aimed to win the grand prize in the Royal Poetry Collection. She expressed a fervent desire to study anything of quality to improve her craft, even if just a little. Maisie, maintaining her outward charm, encouraged Rachel, assuring her that her poems were capable of securing a victory. Turning her attention to Felicia, Rachel extended the invitation to compete, suggesting that Felicia, too, should aim for the grand prize given the loveliness of her work. Felicia accepted the compliment with a flushed, hesitant gratitude. The Royal Poetry Collection stood as a pillar of literary prestige, a volume published twice a year that compiled excellent poems from across the kingdom. It was widely whispered that securing the grand prize in this collection served as the fastest path to becoming a royal poet. Felicia harbored a secret desire for this accolade, her heart yearning for the prize. However, the recent defeat weighed heavily on her. After losing to Maisie's disjointed poem, voicing such a lofty ambition felt presumptuous. She rationalized her feelings, admitting that while she didn't strictly aim for a court position, the encouragement of others made the goal feel desirable. Later, in the privacy of their residence, Felicia and Rachel continued their discussion. Rachel praised Felicia's abilities, but Felicia deflected, stating she lacked the confidence to pursue the grand prize seriously. Seeking to lift spirits and foster improvement, Rachel proposed a plan. At the upcoming tea party the day after next, they would all exchange poems. The idea sparked joy, promising a fun and constructive gathering. Suddenly, Maisie appeared, her voice cutting through their planning session. She feigned ignorance, claiming she had just happened to be listening in, and immediately requested to join the tea party. The sudden intrusion caught the group off guard. One of the girls attempted to politely decline, explaining that the number of attendees had been set long ago and it would be difficult to accommodate an extra person so late. Maisie's expression shifted instantly from cheerful to pitiful. Resorting to emotional manipulation, tears welled in Maisie's eyes as she begged not to be left out. She offered to stand at the edge of the gathering if necessary, her sniffles echoing in the hallway. The guilt trip proved effective. Rachel, unable to withstand the sight of crying, capitulated. She promised to ask the maids to add one more place setting, pleading with Maisie to stop crying. Maisie's demeanor instantly brightened, confirming the success of her tactic. Felicia observed this exchange with a critical eye, noting that while Maisie wasn't annoying enough to be labeled a nuisance, she possessed a subtly pushy nature that often bulldozed boundaries. Maisie celebrated her inclusion, expressing delight at hanging out with friends and reading their poems, while Felicia's mind drifted to past offenses. She recalled a specific date with her fiancé, Cyrus, following the Ashfield estate party. Even on a private gondola ride, intended for just the couple, Maisie had tagged along as usual. In the memory, Felicia sat beside Cyrus, her expression guarded, as Maisie cheerfully noted they were riding the same gondola as last time. This remark triggered a realization in Felicia. She recalled that after the previous week's party, Toby and others had come to this same spot with Maisie. Cyrus, seemingly indifferent to the implications, had dismissed the intrusion, claiming he didn't mind, but for Felicia, this recurring pattern of a third wheel was a source of constant, silent trouble. Back in the present, whispers from other students reached Felicia's ears. They critiqued Maisie's forward behavior, noting how inappropriate it was for a baron's daughter. They drew comparisons between the two, praising Felicia for being smart and distinct from her stepsister. Felicia tried to focus on a joke Neil had made about Toby to distract herself, but the gossip grated on her. Internally, Felicia reached a breaking point. She resented the way the observers silently blamed Cyrus for the awkward dynamics while she was expected to maintain a facade of composure. The injustice of it stung. Cyrus and Maisie had gone on a date without his fiancée, yet Felicia was the one enduring the social commentary. She refused to dismiss her feelings as petty jealousy. The reality that they chatted about the affair while ignoring her, expecting her to simply smile through the humiliation, fueled a quiet rage. Rachel interrupted Felicia's brooding, reiterating her belief that together they could aim for the grand prize. Felicia, overwhelmed by the convergence of academic failure and romantic insecurity, politely excused herself. She claimed an inability to focus and decided to go home early, leaving Rachel concerned. Walking alone, the dark thoughts swirled in Felicia's mind. When she considered the dynamic between Cyrus and Maisie, doubt cast a long shadow over her impending marriage. Despite the happiness of those around her and Cyrus's agreement to the union, she could not summon joy. Cyrus's tendency to look down on people, combined with Maisie's persistent behavior, created a suffocating environment. Felicia's thoughts returned to poetry, the one realm where she sought solace. She acknowledged Rachel's incredible talent and the weight of her belief. However, the sting of her poem not being chosen lingered. She recalled a pivotal moment when His Highness had declared himself a fan of her work. Prior to that, she had never considered writing for recognition. Poetry had simply been a part of her everyday life. The frustration bubbled over as she recited lines from the winning poem, Boom! A burning manly heart, even a dense girl gained a friend of the heart. The rudimentary rhymes and clumsy phrasing infuriated her. Losing to such a composition felt like an insult to the art form. She conceded that Maisie's opening was beautiful, but the disparity between the start and the finish haunted her. As she stewed in her sadness, a knock at the door interrupted her spiral. Prince Kevin entered the room. In her distracted state, Felicia admonished him for using his title, only to realize her slip. Kevin laughed off the formality, explaining he had a quick meeting nearby about a ceremony and decided to visit. He inquired why she was at the academy instead of home. Kevin, ever observant, noted her despondent mood and asked if she was okay. He questioned if something specific had happened, his intuition cutting through her defenses. Felicia, touched by his kindness as a friend, hesitated before admitting the truth. She confessed that she had performed poorly in poetry class and had been feeling down since. Kevin, displaying a gentle interest, asked if he could see the poem in question. Kevin took the sheet of paper, standing by the window where the light was best. Tension filled the room as he read. Felicia watched him nervously, dreading his assessment but needing his honest opinion. After a moment of silence, he thanked her for showing it to him. His critique was direct. He told her that the poem did not feel like her. It came across as ordinary and stiff. He apologized for his bluntness, aware that such honesty could be embarrassing. Felicia absorbed the words, the truth of them settling in. Kevin continued, elaborating on his perspective. He explained that he had read several of her poems and stories, and he was a fan precisely because of her unique voice. He asked if she had perhaps tried to mimic the style of the previous year's Royal Collection winners simply because he had mentioned liking it. He questioned if she had lost her own style in the process. He stepped closer, holding the manuscript. He reminded her that her poems usually possessed a kindness toward others and a gentle gaze, qualities that were absent in this piece. The realization hit Felicia with the force of a physical blow. She admitted to herself that she had gotten carried away by his praise, writing not what she wanted, but what she thought would please him. She questioned what she had been doing with her art. Tears gathered in her eyes as she confessed her motivations. She wanted to write something beautiful using the pen he had given her, but her intent had been corrupted by a desire to flatter. She felt pathetic for sulking over losing to Maisie when her own work lacked integrity. Kevin listened patiently, expressing relief that she had cleared her head and understood the root of the issue. Having delivered his guidance, Kevin prepared to leave. He thanked her for her wonderful poems and promised to always cheer for her as a friend. Felicia, her spirit bolstered by his support, affirmed his words. Before departing completely, Kevin paused and turned back. He suggested that someday she might even win the grand prize. Felicia reacted with shock, reminding him that she had only received an honorable mention the previous year. Kevin's belief in her remained unshaken. Felicia internalized his encouragement, realizing that he truly believed she was capable of achieving the highest honor. The knowledge that he believed in her ignited a spark of determination within her. She vowed to try her best. As he walked away, Felicia watched him, her heart swelling with a renewed sense of purpose and affection. The lesson resonated deeply. If she believed in herself as he did, her dreams would surely come true. The afternoon sun filtered through the high windows of the estate, illuminating a gathering defined by elegance, porcelain, and the rustling of paper. The group of young noblewomen had convened for their promised tea party, a social ritual centered on the exchange of poetry. By Rachel's suggestion, they had adopted a game of anonymity, writing poems, swapping them randomly, and deducing the author based on style and content. The atmosphere carried a veneer of Brittany cute, with flowers dancing and smiles filling the air, a sentiment the group quickly attributed to Brittany herself. However, the tranquility fractured as the next poem was read aloud. The verses spoke of a summer at the sea, but the imagery clashed violently with the romantic setting. Instead of serenity, the poem described fighting and quarreling, the tactile discomfort of sand sticking to skin, and a narrator becoming visibly irritated by the blazing sun. The jarring juxtaposition of a lover's arrival with the narrator's annoyance led the group to a unanimous and immediate conclusion: this was Maisie's work. Maisie, rather than shrinking from the critique, preened with a smug sense of accomplishment. She interpreted their swift identification of her work not as a commentary on its chaotic nature, but as proof that her style was overflowing with originality. She beamed, exclaiming her happiness that the description of a lover arriving was considered lovely, completely bypassing the confusion her poem had generated. She admitted to wanting everyone to write better poems, positioning herself as a benevolent, if eccentric, critic. The mood shifted again as the next piece commanded the room's attention. This poem possessed an overwhelming imagery that pulled the listeners directly into its world, the vivid descriptions nearly moving one student to tears. It was sad, beautiful, and undeniably the work of Rachel. The group showered her with praise, acknowledging her as a literary powerhouse. Yet, amidst the acclaim, Maisie offered a sharp, technical critique. She argued that while the poem struck right in the chest, the love scene in the middle lacked passion. Rachel adjusted her glasses, accepting the criticism with a stoic grace. She confessed that her father was still arranging her marriage and that she had never experienced love. Consequently, her love poems were constructed entirely from imagination and borrowed words. She reasoned that even if she were to fall in love, she would be forced to abandon those feelings once a fiancé was selected, leading her to suppress the very concept of romance. The conversation naturally pivoted to Felicia. The other girls extolled her love scenes as the superior standard, specifically citing a moment where an actress heroine drew courage from her lover. They turned their gaze upon Felicia, attributing the sparkling quality of her poetry to her real-life romance with her handsome fiancé, Cyrus. Felicia sat frozen, a forced smile masking her internal recoil. The group's assumption, that her passion flowed from Cyrus, could not have been further from the truth. In the privacy of her thoughts, she acknowledged that the sparkle in her work was born from the encouragement of Prince Kevin regarding the Royal Poetry Anthology, not her engagement. The reality of her relationship with Cyrus was cold and stagnant. Whenever he visited, he bypassed her entirely to speak with her father. She felt the weight of a relationship that was going nowhere, contrasting sharply with the lovey-dovey image her friends projected onto her. As the tea party wound down, the conversation drifted to local gossip. Maisie enthusiastically recommended a new cafe in the Noble District called Pumpkin Hat, claiming the sign had caught her eye. She basked in the admiration of her peers, wearing a triumphant "Doya" expression as they praised her knack for spotting quality shops. Felicia observed this performance with a simmering, silent resentment. She recognized the shop immediately because she was the one who had originally found it. This pattern repeated constantly. Maisie would present plays, books, and shops to the group as her own discoveries, despite having received the information secondhand from Felicia. Maisie never credited Felicia, erasing her contribution entirely. Felicia chided herself for being petty over such a trivial matter, yet the consistent lack of acknowledgement gnawed at her peace. The duality of her existence pressed upon her. Felicia felt torn between the political necessity of her engagement to the Earhart family and the personal promise she had made to Kevin. She questioned if she was being greedy by chasing two rabbits, seeking success in both her duty and her passion. Resolving to prioritize her art, she decided to retreat to the library, determined to challenge the Royal Poetry Anthology with a poem containing all her strength. The following morning, the library offered a quiet sanctuary. Felicia discovered Rachel already there, seated amidst stacks of references but struggling to write. Felicia explained that the abundance of reference materials in the library made it easier for her to focus, a contrast to Rachel's writer's block. Rachel, observing Felicia, dismantled the latter's insecurities with surgical precision. She noted that Felicia had considered abandoning love to focus solely on poetry, a luxury Rachel claimed to possess but Felicia did not. Rachel argued that Felicia could not simply ignore her engagement and family matters. They were integral to who she was. It was precisely because Felicia was not like Rachel, because she carried the burden of balancing these conflicting worlds, that she was able to write such beautiful love scenes. The realization struck Felicia. Rachel continued, declaring Felicia the most talented student in the academy and expressing deep respect for how seriously she faced the art form. Rachel apologized for her previous dismissal, admitting she had been happy when Felicia suggested aiming for the grand prize together, but her own depression had silenced her response at the time. Emboldened by this validation, Felicia revealed the source of her drive. She had made a promise to someone to win the prize. Rachel accepted this confession with a smile, officially declaring them rivals. She vowed to aim for the grand prize as well, asserting that she would write a poem that would not lose to anyone, not even Felicia. The two girls, having acknowledged each other's strength, sat side by side at the library table. Rachel teased that she wouldn't plagiarize, but she intended to spy on the enemy. As their pens scratched against the paper, the tension of competition transformed into a mutual force of elevation, two artists pushing one another toward the summit of the royal poetry anthology. The garden provided a quiet backdrop for the shifting dynamics between Felicia and her fiancé. Felicia requested a shift in address, asking him to call her Cyrus rather than a formal title, to which he agreed, cementing the verbal reality of their engagement. Cyrus flattered her, claiming he must be the luckiest man alive to have someone like her as his wife, though Felicia's internal monologue revealed a disconnect. She recalled gossip expressing disbelief that Cyrus had agreed to become a son-in-law, and she noted they had never shared a proper date. The narrative shifted to a confrontation within the Earhart estate. Felicia interrupted a meeting between her father and Cyrus, her eyes locking onto loan documents bearing the name of the Hamer family. She demanded to know why her father was loaning them money, piercing the veil of their engagement. Her father attempted to bifurcate the issues, insisting that bringing Cyrus into the family and aiding the Hamers were separate matters, urging Felicia not to worry. However, the reality of their courtship contradicted this reassurance. On a day designated for a date, Maisie walked alongside them, a persistent third wheel that Cyrus ignored while he zoned out. Felicia, pushed to her limit by the intrusion, whispered a confrontation to Cyrus, questioning why he always invited Maisie. She noted internally that Maisie always volunteered, and Cyrus simply never refused, leaving Felicia to wonder why she had to endure her cousin's presence on a romantic outing. Felicia finally drew a line. She asked Maisie to sit this one out, expressing a desire to treasure a date with just the two of them so they could understand each other. Maisie immediately weaponized her tears, claiming she only wanted to spend time with friends because she never had them before. Cyrus instinctively sided with the tears, admonishing Felicia for being petty and sending a friend home out of jealousy. He invited Maisie to continue with them, nullifying Felicia's attempt at boundaries. They arrived at the cafe, Pumpkin Hat, where Maisie presented the location with a flourish, claiming she wanted to show them a nice shop. Felicia seethed silently, recognizing the shop as her own discovery that Maisie had appropriated as her own favorite. Cyrus praised Maisie's taste, completely oblivious to the theft of credit. As they settled, Cyrus dismissed Felicia's earlier concerns about the intrusion, telling her not to be swayed by such things. He then immediately pivoted to his true objective. He requested to visit her house afterward to speak with Marky Earhart. When Felicia questioned the suddenness, he vaguely cited support and such, mirroring her father's earlier deflection about the loan. The truth crystallized in Felicia's mind. The Earhart family needed a son-in-law, and the Hamer family faced a debt crisis so severe they had to send 2 of their 3 sons away into marriages. Cyrus was marrying into her family not out of affection, but because the Hamers had given in to secure financial support. Felicia realized that her fiancé viewed her family as a bank, explaining why he tolerated Maisie and occasionally stung Felicia with his words. Despite this, she resolved to fulfill her duty and not get upset over every little thing. At the academy, whispers followed Felicia, attributing her position solely to fortune. She channeled the frustration into a rival spark, determining to use the jealousy and experience to add depth to her love poetry and aim for the grand prize. The atmosphere at school shifted with the arrival of Prince Kevin at the training grounds for a match against Professor Douglas. Kevin struggled under the professor's blade, his movements noted as slower than usual by the spectators. Professor Douglas reprimanded him, stating that just being protected isn't enough, and that Kevin was the second royal to ask for retraining. Kevin declared his resolve to protect his people as royalty so they could live free and safe, a sentiment that captivated the female students. Douglas acknowledged the resolve but demanded victory first. Kevin rallied and defeated the instructor. As the crowd cheered, Kevin cast a glance toward Felicia, which her friend interpreted as a personal gesture. Inspired by his dedication to his duty, Felicia vowed to give her all to both her engagement and the grand prize. Felicia poured her respect for Kevin and her own complex feelings into a new poem. The verses described a fairy with silver wings whispering to a character named Lily. The central theme revolved around sacrifice. I cannot give both freedom and peace. Choose one, and you lose the other. The narrative within the poem involved a heroine accepting her weakness, parting with the fairy, and disguising herself as a man to take her father's place in the army. Satisfied but wanting to polish the work before the December 31st deadline, Felicia visited the faculty office. The professor encouraged her, noting her recent struggles and hard work. Felicia walked back through the halls, mentally balancing her supports, her poetry, her engagement, and Kevin. She resolved to create a masterpiece to stand tall before the prince. Upon returning to her desk, Felicia found her privacy shattered. Maisie stood there, reading the draft of the poem without permission. Felicia's face flushed with heat and anger as she demanded Maisie stop. Maisie feigned innocence, claiming she only wanted to give advice because she saw how hard Felicia was working. Felicia shut her down cold. She declared she was aiming for the prize with this poem and did not need advice, explicitly stating she did not want Maisie to see it. Maisie pivoted instantly, adopting a competitive persona. She claimed to understand and declared she would view Felicia as a rival, promising not to lose either. Felicia forced herself to endure the interaction, telling herself it would be unseemly to get worked up. She accepted Maisie's promise to keep the poem a secret. However, internally, the dam broke. Felicia lamented that having family like this was the worst. The narrator revealed that this moment marked the snapping point. The thread of small endurances Felicia had been holding onto finally severed. Sunlight streams through the tall windows of the bedchamber, illuminating the delicate features of Felicia as she stirs from her slumber. Her maid, Carla, stands by the drapes she has just pulled back, offering a polite greeting and commenting on the loveliness of the morning. Felicia rises, bringing a hand to her cheek, her expression serene and revitalized. She notes internally that waking up after completing a literary masterpiece leaves one feeling exceptionally refreshed. The scene shifts to the bustling common room of the academy, where a group of young noblewomen gathers, their attention fixed on a newspaper. Excitement ripples through the group as they discuss the Grain Times, specifically the Poem of the Month section where a familiar name has appeared. One girl exclaims that Maisie's poem has received an honorable mention, sparking curiosity about the content of the verse. Another student remarks to Felicia, who has just arrived, that Maisie's work has become the talk of the morning. Felicia acknowledges the greeting, her interest piqued. Rachel enters the fray, holding the newspaper aloft with a sense of purpose, remarking that she anticipated the buzz and brought the proof. While one student dismisses the general quality of poems in this particular paper as low-level, the group's enthusiasm remains undampened. They crowd together, eager to read the entry, chanting for the reading to commence. The newspaper spreads out before them, though the text appears dense and somewhat indecipherable to the casual glance. Amidst the huddle, Maisie accepts the physical affection of her peers, who squeeze her in congratulation. She feigns modesty, apologizing with a playful demeanor while basking in the attention. She coyly suggests that not just anyone gets selected, though she quickly qualifies that the top prize is a different caliber of achievement entirely, fishing for further validation. Internally, however, Felicia observes the scene with a competitive spark. Knowing Maisie is working hard on poetry means Felicia cannot afford to fall behind in her own artistic pursuits. Rachel, however, scans the printed words with a critical eye. While others offer generic praise about how blood tells and express jealousy, Rachel's expression stiffens. She notes that while the opening is awkward, there is a certain quality to it, but her brow furrows as she processes the text further. She questions the impossibility of what she is seeing. Turning to Maisie, Rachel interrogates her, asking if she isn't aiming to be a royal court poet, implying that the work doesn't match the ambition or the expected skill level. Rachel bluntly states that while Felicia might possess such skill, Maisie does not. The atmosphere grows tense as Rachel continues to decipher the poem, the visual representation of the text blurring into garbled nonsense to the reader but seemingly clear to the characters. Suddenly, Rachel shouts Maisie's name, her voice laced with accusation. Maisie attempts to play the innocent, asking what is wrong, but Rachel demands she stop playing dumb. Rachel stomps her foot, demanding an explanation for what the poem is supposed to be. The confrontation escalates. Rachel accuses Maisie of copying a story Rachel wrote and converting it into this poem. She points to the wording in the third stanza, claiming it is exactly like a poem she presented in class when she was chosen. Rachel argues that it isn't just a resemblance. The way the protagonist's feelings are depicted mirrors her own work too closely to be a coincidence. She reminds Maisie that she was present in class to hear the original poem, dismantling the defense of accidental similarity. In a split second of revealed malice, Maisie clicks her tongue, the sound sharp and dismissive. However, the moment she is challenged by the other girls asking who made that noise, Maisie instantly reverts to a trembling victim. She looks around nervously, asking who spoke, feigning ignorance. The other girls, swayed by Maisie's performance, suggest Rachel is being paranoid. Maisie, now emboldened by the group's support, suggests that perhaps she was merely influenced by something, noting that such things happen to everyone. Rachel recoils, insulted by the insinuation that this is merely referencing. She insists this is imitation, not influence. Maisie begins to cry, and the social tide turns against Rachel. The other girls comfort the sobbing Maisie, criticizing Rachel for being too harsh. Overwhelmed and isolated, Rachel tears up, feeling the injustice of the situation. She declares she will go explain the truth to the teacher, asserting that she didn't write her poem just for it to be stolen, before fleeing the room. With Rachel gone, the group turns their sympathies entirely to Maisie. Felicia approaches, urging Maisie not to cry and complimenting the poem as lovely. To distract her, Felicia begins to analyze the narrative within the verse. It tells the story of a girl named Daisy who dresses as a man to go to the battlefield in place of her injured father. As Felicia recites the lines, the imagery becomes vivid. A golden-winged, shining fairy whispers in Daisy's ear, offering a stark ultimatum. She cannot have both freedom and stability. The fairy warns that choosing one means losing the other, and that she cannot have everything. As Felicia reads the segment where Daisy parts ways with the fairy and admits her own weakness, a cold realization strikes her. The text before Felicia's eyes ceases to be a stranger's work. She recognizes the phrasing, the specific articulation of human frailty. It is identical to her own poetry. The realization makes her skin crawl. Maisie, drying her tears, admits to using Felicia's poem as a bit of reference as well. The word reference hangs in the air, heavy with deceit. Maisie launches into a defense, arguing that nobody writes without influence and that everyone creates while referencing existing works. Felicia listens, noting that while the argument follows a certain logic, it leaves her with a helpless, hollow feeling. Felicia reflects internally on the nature of writing. She acknowledges that while no one writes in a vacuum, she has never simply rewritten someone else's poem. She thinks of how she weaves words she knows, crafting expressions to convey the beauty she discovers in the world, feelings that belong to no one, yet the expression of them is personal. Felicia struggles with the concept that taking the beauty someone else felt and claiming it as one's own can be justified. She understands that the person who has been stolen from knows the truth, even if others dismiss it as paranoia. Maisie understands this logic yet weaponizes it. Felicia realizes with horror that because Maisie has published this stolen patchwork, Felicia can no longer submit her own, promised poem anywhere, as it will now appear that she is the plagiarist. Later, in the privacy of her own home, Felicia sits under the glow of a chandelier, unable to focus, her mind muddled by the day's events. Cyrus enters, noticing her distress immediately. He teases gently, asking if he has come to ask her father for support again, but observing her silence, he wonders if she will understand the turmoil in his heart. Felicia decides to voice her anxiety, revealing that the source of her trouble is Maisie. Cyrus asks if Maisie has done something again, prompting Felicia to hesitate. She brings up the fact that Maisie frequently tags along on their dates, suggesting that perhaps Cyrus hasn't been happy about it either. Cyrus admits that while it is true, the negative bias makes it hard to talk about. Felicia realizes that her frustration has been building up for a long time, far more than she realized. The dam breaks within Felicia's mind. She admits to herself that she hates Maisie, hates the brazen pushiness disguised as modesty and the shamelessness of stealing from others. She confesses to Cyrus that Maisie stole her poem, explaining that the submitted work contained scenes and wording identical to her own. She expects outrage or support. Instead, Cyrus's reaction is lukewarm. He acknowledges the statement with a simple, "I see," but then dismisses it, saying, "Nah, it's fine." Felicia is stunned. Cyrus explains that because Maisie has been with them since their first date, he has gotten to know her pretty well. He reasons that since Maisie is Felicia's cousin, she is practically his family too, and there is no harm in staying friendly. Felicia recalls that Cyrus never seemed bothered by Maisie's intrusion. While surprised at first, he accepted it as normal. He tells Felicia that she can keep her distance if she wishes, agreeing that it might be best for her, but he explicitly states that he intends to keep getting along with Maisie. The scene ends with Felicia feeling utterly cornered. She watches Cyrus smile, a look of satisfaction on his face that she cannot comprehend. The weight on her chest grows heavier, making it difficult to breathe, as she realizes her isolation is now complete. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains, yet it failed to pierce the gloom settling over Lady Felicia's chambers. Her maid, Carla, observed her mistress with a furrowed brow, sensing the weight hidden behind the young noblewoman's polite dismissal of concern. Felicia sat on the edge of her bed, her posture slumped and her gaze cast downward, a heavy sigh escaping her lips as the brightness of the day only served to deepen her internal shadow. Upon arriving at the academy, Felicia attempted to maintain her composure, greeting her peers with a practiced smile. However, the facade crumbled under the scrutiny of her friend Rachel, who immediately noted the swollen, red-rimmed state of Felicia's eyes behind her spectacles. The group gathered in the hallway, their expressions shifting from pleasantry to concern as they probed the source of her distress. They speculated about a fight, but the truth was far more insidious. Felicia revealed that yesterday, Maisie had nitpicked her poem, a subtle aggression that left Felicia feeling isolated, as Maisie now seemed to be actively avoiding her. Her friends rallied around her, advising her to ignore Maisie's petty behavior and not let the slight fester. Yet, the conversation took a sharper turn as another friend voiced a suspicion that had been brewing for some time. She pointed out that the shops and books Maisie frequently boasted about were not her own discoveries. Rather, they were treasures she had siphoned from Felicia. Felicia confirmed this observation with a heavy heart, admitting that she had remained silent to avoid conflict, deeming it unworthy of a public dispute. Nevertheless, the theft gnawed at her. Maisie possessed a talent for presenting these stolen interests as her own original finds, even claiming the very shop they had visited together as her personal discovery. The realization that her friends shared this unease brought a collective sense of validation to the group. The narrative shifted to recount Maisie's manipulative tactics. When confronted, Maisie would feign innocence, claiming she merely wanted to join in on the fun, twisting the narrative to make herself the victim of exclusion. She would lament about not being invited to picnics or seaside trips, rewriting history to suggest she heard plans from Felicia, effectively guilt-tripping everyone while simultaneously stealing the spotlight. This shameless behavior allowed Maisie to plunder the creative work of others without a shred of remorse. Her peers recognized this rot at her core, disgusted by her ability to act pitiful while engaging in intellectual theft. The discussion returned to the present, focusing on the specific injury of the poetry. Felicia revealed that Maisie had copied her poem as well. Rachel analyzed the structure of Maisie's work, noting a jarring inconsistency. Trite, amateurish verses were interspersed with oddly brilliant lines. It became clear that Maisie was a literary parasite, cobbling together fragments borrowed from various works to create a disjointed whole. The tragedy lay in the subtlety of the crime. To an outsider, the similarities might seem coincidental, mere echoes of inspiration. Proof of plagiarism remained elusive because Maisie altered minute details, masking the theft enough to evade definitive accusation while inflicting a deep, personal wound on the original author. Felicia and her friends understood that while the imitator might dismiss the act lightly, the violation was profound. It was sickening to watch someone else parade stolen creativity with unearned confidence. For Felicia, poetry was not just a hobby but an extension of her soul, springing from her unconscious self. The fear that her inner world would be pilfered again poisoned the act of creation. She confessed that she could no longer write for the sheer joy of it. The looming threat of theft made her despise the very craft she once loved. This violation robbed the artist of the pure delight of creating something beautiful, replacing it with a black haze of suspicion and resentment. Meanwhile, a different kind of desperation played out in the halls of the Earhart estate. Cyrus, Felicia's fiancé, stood alongside his father, bowing deeply in a humiliating display of supplication before Marquis Earhart. They were there to beg for financial aid yet again. The Marquis, looking down at them with cold scrutiny, questioned Cyrus's effort, challenging the notion that simply throwing money at their debts would solve the underlying rot in their family's finances. Cyrus, trembling, could only stammer that he was following his father's orders, his pride stripped away as he pleaded for a loan. He clenched his fist behind his back, a silent testament to his internal agony. The Marquis dismissed them, promising only to think about it, and Cyrus hurriedly excused himself, refusing the offer to see Felicia before leaving. He could not bear to face her in his current state. Later, Cyrus sought refuge in a tavern, drowning his shame in alcohol alongside his friends Toby and Neil. He lamented the exhaustion of his double life, pretending to be a kind fiancé to Felicia while secretly begging her father for money. He slammed his tankard onto the wooden table, cursing his situation. The marriage to Felicia was a necessity for his family's survival, a tether keeping them from financial ruin. Despite his pathetic circumstances, Cyrus clung to his vanity, reminding himself that he was the heir to a marquis skilled with a sword, and possessed looks that had once made him popular. He justified his humiliation as a temporary sacrifice for his family's debt. The conversation among the young men drifted to the marriage market and their careers in the Royal Knights. They noted that knights from poorer backgrounds often left the service around age 25 to take stable, lower-paying jobs as civil officials or guards. In contrast, those with wealthy inheritances remained in the order for honor, taking their time to find a bride. Toby and Neil, both second sons of viscounts, expressed their envy of Cyrus. They were desperate to secure a wealthy match before their time in the prestigious order ran out. They teased Cyrus, noting that he had it good as an eldest son with a capable fiancée like Felicia. However, the mood shifted when Cyrus revealed his intentions regarding social connections. His friends urged him to introduce them to ladies, perhaps Felicia's friends. The conversation inevitably turned to Maisie. Cyrus, in a drunken haze, suggested inviting Maisie next time, speculating she might bring friends. His friends reacted with skepticism and distaste, aware of Maisie's reputation and the friction between her and Felicia. They questioned if Maisie even had friends to bring. Despite knowing Felicia disliked her, Cyrus callously decided that if he had business with Maisie, likely seeing her as a useful tool or connection, he would engage with her regardless of his fiancée's feelings. He rationalized that Maisie, as the eldest daughter of House Goddard, still held social value. The narrative briefly flashed back to a party hosted by Barney, where Felicia's presence had irritated Cyrus's inner circle. Someone recalled the smug, self-righteous look on Felicia's face, admitting a dark satisfaction in seeing her distressed. This resentment simmered beneath the surface of their social interactions. Time moved forward to January 1st. The holiday brought no joy to Felicia. She sat alone, devastatingly composing herself after learning she had not made it past the preliminaries for the Royal Poetry Collection. She attributed the failure to her muddled state of mind, acknowledging that a hastily written poem stood no chance. She asked Carla to leave her be, retreating into her sorrow. The rejection compounded her anxiety. Her engagement was the only stability left, yet even that felt precarious. She felt the invisible hands of failure strangling her, a sensation of suffocation that threatened to snap her composure. She tried to convince herself she was blessed, but the pain of her poem and her promise falling apart was a heavy burden. The silence of the room was broken by the exuberant entry of Rosemary, Felicia's younger sister. Rosemary, dressed in a frilly gown, confessed to eavesdropping but quickly pivoted to her main objective, cheering up her sister. She demanded they go to Café Pumpkin Hat for tea. Rosemary's childish persistence and genuine concern chipped away at Felicia's wall of misery. Rosemary chided Felicia for pushing herself too hard, insisting that even writers needed breaks. With a resigned but grateful sigh, Felicia agreed, and Rosemary joyfully ordered Carla to prepare Felicia's dress. On that same cold day, in the Noble District, snow dusted the cobblestones as Cyrus waited outside. He shivered, his breath visible in the frigid air. His companions questioned his decision to invite Maisie, reminding him of Felicia's complaints. Cyrus dismissed their concerns with cold pragmatism, stating that his business with Maisie took precedence over Felicia's feelings. Suddenly, Prince Kevin and the young noble Barney approached. Kevin, the fifth-round winner of the court match, was being congratulated. Barney, cheeky and full of himself, challenged Kevin to a spar. As they engaged in a brief exchange, Cyrus critiqued Barney's stance as too wide. Kevin effortlessly handled the spar, earning praise, while Barney pouted, annoyed by the lecture on his technique. Cyrus looked on with disdain, irritated by Barney's cockiness despite his lower status and age. He internally scoffed at how Barney and Kevin used to stick to him, the Marquis's son, hoping for handouts, only to drift away when his lack of real authority became apparent. Back at the estate, Felicia emerged in a stunning dress, the very one she had worn when her engagement was first decided. Rosemary noted that it had been a while since she wore it. Felicia, looking at her reflection with renewed determination, declared she wanted to put some spirit back into her engagement. Rosemary cheered this decision, encouraging her sister to breathe and clear her head so she could write better poems in the future. The final moments of the chapter juxtaposed the two fiancés. Cyrus stood in the cold, waiting for another woman to secure his own selfish ends, while Felicia, bathed in the warmth of her sister's love, steeled herself to fight for her dignity and her art. The visual dichotomy hinted heavily that the time of parting for this ill-suited couple was drawing near. Felicia sat amidst the elegant ambience of a stylish café, savoring a blissful moment of solitude and flavor as she brought a cup of tea to her lips. She relished the opportunity to enjoy tea accompanied only by Carla, finding a distinct sense of refreshment in the simple fact that Maisie was not present to disrupt the atmosphere. Carla wiped the table diligently, prompting Felicia to reflect on the usual complications that arose when Maisie tagged along. Typically, Maisie would bring her own maid, forcing Carla, who lacked noble status, to wait outside the shop rather than join them. Her mind drifted to the persistent rumors and confrontations she faced at school, where peers constantly demanded to know why she harbored such hatred for Maisie. Although Felicia viewed her actions merely as avoidance, the general consensus among the student body branded her behavior as bullying. She struggled to articulate the root of her disdain, questioning herself inwardly about why the aversion ran so deep, especially since Maisie never openly displayed malice toward her. She considered that perhaps, in the past, she might have felt a sense of shame regarding these feelings, but her introspection was interrupted by the chime of the cafe door and a staff member welcoming new guests. A request for a table for 4 sliced through the air, drawing Felicia's attention to the new arrivals. She observed with sharp clarity that Maisie had arrived, not with friends of her own, but accompanied by Toby, Neil, and most crucially, Cyrus. The realization struck her that Maisie had not invited a single female friend, choosing instead to surround herself with Felicia's fiancé and his associates. Felicia listened intently as the group settled nearby, their conversation immediately drifting toward her. One of the group members dismissed Felicia's potential reaction, suggesting that exclusion was simply the kind of thing Felicia would do, while another expressed surprise at seeing Cyrus and Maisie together. The narrative being spun at the neighboring table painted a picture where nobody was friendly with Maisie, forcing her to team up with Rachel and others to allegedly gang up and exclude Maisie. A high-pitched, mocking laugh erupted from the group as they justified their gathering, claiming it was perfectly fine for them to have fun among themselves while never inviting Felicia. Felicia absorbed the cruel irony, understanding finally that they viewed her as the villain, yet she failed to comprehend why they had always directed such meanness toward her. Within the visual frame of her memory, Felicia recalled the false narratives Maisie spread, specifically the claim that Felicia had ordered her not to hang out with Maisie out of sheer jealousy. This fabrication incensed Felicia, for the reality was starkly different. Maisie had persistently followed her everywhere, barging into gatherings and social events where only Felicia had been invited, asking, "Can I come too?" with relentless intrusion. Maisie had even tagged along on dates with Felicia's cousin, who was not blood-related, every single time. Yet what shocked Felicia more than Maisie's clinging was Cyrus's response to the situation. In the present, Cyrus defended his actions loudly to his companions, asserting that while he had agreed to keep some distance from Maisie, he had never explicitly promised not to see her. He rationalized that he saw no issue with meeting up with her cousin, regardless of his status as a fiancé, despite not explicitly communicating this loophole to Felicia. When a friend questioned whether it was wise to ignore Felicia's wishes and potentially anger her, Cyrus exploded with dismissal, shouting that he did not care in the slightest. Cyrus continued his tirade, labeling Felicia as selfish and citing an instance where she tried to stop him from associating with Barney, claiming she refused to listen to him. He argued that simply because Felicia had decided to hate Maisie, she believed she possessed the authority to order him around, a notion he found infuriating. Clenching his fist, he declared that a girl like her was unfit to be his fiancée, questioning why she sided with Barney instead of considering his feelings, a sentiment his friends quickly echoed in agreement. Rosemary, sitting with Felicia, whispered for her to endure the insults, identifying the noisy group as the Hamer family. Felicia reassured Rosemary that she was fine, maintaining her composure even as the weight of the situation pressed upon her. She understood the stakes. If the engagement failed, the Earhart family would suffer, as the social arrangement relied on their son's fiancée being from the Earhart lineage. However, the Hamer family continued their derision, laughing and openly stating that Felicia was unfit, despite society previously viewing the union as a perfect match. Cyrus justified his association with Maisie by claiming he only saw her because Felicia was such a lousy fiancée, asserting that Maisie thought about him far more than Felicia did. Maisie smiled, affirming she was on Cyrus's side, unlike Felicia. The gossip spiraled further as they insulted the Earhart family directly, calling the fiancé a disappointment and criticizing the alleged disgraceful scene Felicia was making, despite her silence. Felicia realized that because of Cyrus, her entire family was being insulted and mocked. Rosemary asked if she was okay, and Felicia initially clung to the mantra that she was fortunate and must endure. But as the realization settled that her endurance was failing to protect the Earhart family name, the very thing she had been suffering to preserve, her resolve shifted. She took a breath, her expression hardening as she decided on a definitive course of action. A memory surfaced in her mind, a vision of Kevin standing tall and looking cool, offering words dedicated to her about courage. Empowered by this recollection, Felicia acknowledged that she had been lying to herself, turning a blind eye to reality for too long. She resolved to believe what she saw with her own eyes rather than dismissing Cyrus's actions and Maisie's behavior as petty things not worth mentioning. She admitted that her refusal to believe the truth and her lack of courage had caused sorrow to appear on the faces of her family. With newfound clarity, Felicia comforted her attendants, apologizing to Rosemary and Carla for her lack of courage, assuring them that everything was all right now. She stood up, leaving her table to approach the source of the noise. Meanwhile, Cyrus continued his soliloquy, unaware of Felicia's approach. He laughed, claiming that if Kevin saw him, he would be a disgrace as a friend for looking so pathetic. He conceded that while Felicia was definitely beautiful, smart, and from a good family, he felt there was someone else who suited him better, someone who would respect him more. He expressed annoyance at Felicia's independence, mocking her for having her own opinions and demanding that she not mock him. Cyrus complained that Felicia always thought she was right and acted high and mighty, just as Felicia signaled a server to request a table for two nearby. The sound of her voice startled Cyrus, causing him to stammer as she stepped into his view. Felicia coldly finished his thought for him, suggesting that if he felt that way, he should go find someone like that. Cyrus panicked, stuttering her name in shock. Felicia stood firm, declaring that she understood perfectly how he thought now. Without hesitation, she announced her intention to speak with her father and have the engagement annulled. As Cyrus gaped in disbelief at the concept of annulment, Felicia finalized the interaction with a decisive command to break off the engagement immediately. The confrontation reaches its breaking point as Cyrus stammers, his composure fracturing under the weight of his own previous arrogance. He attempts to backpedal, claiming that his declaration of breaking the engagement was merely a jest, his voice wavering as he tries to salvage the situation. Felicia stands resolute, her gaze piercing through his excuses, reminding him that he had articulated those very words himself only moments prior. She refuses to let him rewrite the immediate past, asserting that she heard him clearly. Cyrus looks cornered, sweat forming on his brow as the reality of his blunder closes in on him. Felicia continues her verbal dismantle of his defense, pointing out that he had loudly mocked her and the Earhart family without a single thought for the consequences or his position as her fiancé. Cyrus struggles to form a coherent response, stumbling over his words, but Felicia cuts through his hesitation with absolute finality. She declares that she believes the evidence of her own eyes over his faltering explanations. The image of his betrayal burns in her mind, a memory of him intimate with another, dismissing Felicia entirely. She affirms that this visual proof is what she chooses to believe, turning her face away from him to signal the end of the discussion. With a sharp turn, Felicia addresses the room, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil. She instructs them not to worry about her and to stay and enjoy their festivities, effectively dismissing herself from the toxic environment. She announces her intention to take a public carriage home, rejecting any offer of assistance from the Hamer family. Another guest, Carla, decides to leave as well, apologizing to Rosemary for departing early despite the invitation, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Felicia walks away, leaving the tension behind her. Inside, the atmosphere curdles as bystanders whisper about the scene they just witnessed. Observers note that Cyrus is panicking, realizing that if the engagement is truly broken, the Hamer family will be the ones to suffer the political fallout. Felicia, exiting the hall, understands that Cyrus's pride acts as a barrier, preventing him from offering a genuine apology. She feels the eyes of the crowd on her, treating her as if she were something contagious to be avoided. She pushes through the heavy doors, acknowledging that an apology at this stage would be futile regardless. She steps out into the night, leaving the suffocating social circle behind. The moment the heavy doors seal shut behind her, the biting cold of the winter night seizes her. A sudden, horrifying realization strikes her. In her haste to make a dignified exit, she forgot her cloak. She visualizes herself freezing, transforming into a literal snowman, and contemplates turning back to retrieve it. However, her pride intervenes immediately. She imagines the humiliation of re-entering the party she just stormed out of. She resolves that she cannot do something so pathetic, preferring the cold to the loss of dignity. She attempts to laugh off the absurdity of her situation, but the laughter comes out strained and shivering. The weather proves far worse than she anticipated. Heavy snow falls in thick sheets, blanketing the streets and silencing the city. She scans the road for a public carriage, but the severe weather has halted all transport services. She laments her luck, unable to believe the weather deteriorated so rapidly. Standing alone in the freezing wind, she chastises herself for her impulsiveness. She admits that acting on impulse never leads to a positive outcome, realizing she rushed out with nothing but a book, leaving her protection against the elements behind. She calls herself an idiot, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air as she sighs deeply. Despite the physical cold gnawing at her bones, a strange sense of clarity washes over her. She acknowledges that knowing Cyrus does not love her brings her no pain. She realizes she is not hurt at all by this revelation. Previously, she believed the lack of affection mattered, but now she sees the truth clearly. If he views her merely as a tool for his family's pleasure or a fortunate match for a noble's daughter, the relationship is devoid of meaning. She decides firmly that she does not care about any of those political or social expectations anymore. The snow continues to swirl around her, catching in her hair and eyelashes. She stands resolute in the storm, her cheeks flushed from the cold but her expression calm. She affirms to herself that Cyrus truly does not matter to her existence. The realization liberates her, and she repeats the sentiment internally, solidifying her emotional detachment from him. Suddenly, a presence interrupts her solitude. She notices a figure approaching through the veil of snow. A man steps into her view, causing her to startle. She recognizes him immediately despite the snow. It is Kevin. She demands to know what he is doing there, surprised by his sudden appearance. Kevin does not waste time with explanations. He immediately acts to shield her from the freezing temperature. He removes his own outer layer and drapes it over her. He urges her to hurry and wear it, his voice commanding yet concerned. He ignores her weak protestations, insisting that she just do as he says. Kevin explains his presence while adjusting the garment around her. He reveals that Barney invited him, suggesting they sneak off to a good place he knew. To avoid recognition, Kevin had disguised himself by wrapping a scarf around his face. As he secures the warm clothing around her, he pieces together the timeline. He realizes that she was at the cafe earlier, which explains why he sensed her presence there. Felicia is overcome with embarrassment and vulnerability. She fears that he saw her in what she considers a pathetic mess. The weight of her recent failures crashes down on her, not just the engagement, but the fact that she failed the Royal Poetry Contest, an endeavor Kevin had supported her in. The shame of him seeing her broken and failing burns brighter than the cold. Tears well up in her eyes as she struggles with the fact that she hasn't even told him about the failure yet. Kevin senses her distress and speaks gently to calm her. He reminds her of what he told her before, that it is okay. He reaffirms his loyalty, stating unequivocally that he is on her side. He promises that he will always be her ally, his words cutting through her anxiety. Tears spill from her eyes, freezing on her cheeks as his kindness overwhelms her defenses. Kevin looks at her with intense concern, calling her name. Felicia turns away, apologizing through her tears. She confesses her fear, not for herself, but for her family. She was terrified that because of her actions regarding Cyrus, the Earhart family name would suffer. She believed her fault in the relationship would ruin the engagement and bring shame upon her house. She continues her confession, clutching the item he gave her. She explains that when the Earhart name was mocked, she couldn't simply stay quiet and accept the insult. She mentions the Edelweiss, a symbol of courage connected to the bookmark he gave her. She reveals that it was the words Kevin gave her in the past that allowed her to stand her ground. She was able to stand there without shaking because he had turned those words into a bookmark for her, providing a physical anchor for her bravery. She acknowledges the complexity of the situation. She knows that breaking the engagement is a massive event, and admits she doesn't know everything that happened from his perspective. She recognizes that it must have taken courage for him to support her. She expresses that if the Edelweiss was by her side, she is glad. Felicia's mind races with hypotheticals. She wonders if she had been a better person, or kinder to Cyrus, perhaps the engagement could have been salvaged. She admits that the failure isn't solely Cyrus's fault. However, she reaches a crucial conclusion. She could not change herself simply to get along with Cyrus or Maisie. She refuses to alter her fundamental self to fit Cyrus's mold. She turns to Kevin, thanking him sincerely. She tells him that because of him, she can stay true to herself. Regaining her composure, Felicia shifts into a tactical mindset. She realizes she has no time to waste crying. She deduces that she must inform her father immediately before Cyrus has a chance to take back his words or spin the story. She anticipates that the things Cyrus shouted will likely spread as rumors, potentially causing a scandal. A bad reputation could mean that a future engagement becomes impossible, and she needs to manage the fallout instantly. Suddenly, a noise interrupts them. Kevin hears a rattle nearby and glances toward the sound. He dismisses it, telling Felicia it is nothing and she doesn't need to worry about it. He notes that the carriage he called has arrived. He reassures her that everything is okay and tells her they can talk another time. Felicia tries to speak, feeling the urgency to tell him something important, but he cuts her off gently, prioritizing her safety. Kevin instructs the driver to take her to the Earhart estate immediately. He turns to Felicia, acknowledging her immediate duty. She needs to speak to Marky Earhart right now. He urges her to get into the carriage. Felicia attempts to return his cloak, not wanting to leave him in the cold, but he stops her. He insists she keep it, stating that if she catches a cold, it would trouble him. He reaffirms that he will be by her side and tells her to go. Felicia complies, stepping into the carriage. As she settles in, Kevin leans in and wraps a scarf around her neck, ensuring she is completely bundled against the freezing air. He winds it carefully, creating a cocoon of warmth around her. He makes her promise not to catch a cold, and she extracts the same promise from him. With a final, "Yeah, I promise," he sends her off. As the carriage pulls away, Felicia calls out her thanks to Kevin, vowing to repay him someday. Sitting in the moving carriage, she realizes she is no longer trembling. Wrapped in his cloak and scarf, she feels a profound sense of warmth that penetrates the winter chill. The kindness he showed her acts as a shield, and she travels home, wrapped up in his care, ready to face her father. The story pauses here, promising a continuation of this warm determination. Back at the banquet hall, the atmosphere curdles into chaos as Cyrus realizes the magnitude of his error. He mutters frantically to himself that things have taken a disastrous turn, his internal monologue spiraling into a repetitive chant of panic. He attempts to shift the burden of guilt, convincing himself that Felicia bears fault in this debacle as well, though he acknowledges he must chase after her immediately. His thoughts race back to the moments prior, blaming Maisie for dragging things out and preventing his immediate pursuit. He rationalizes his delay by telling himself that leaving Maisie behind would have been socially unacceptable, and that he only managed to escape because Toby and the others urged her to leave. He constructs a defensive narrative where he was physically unable to leave his seat because of her insistence, using this to bolster his fragile resolve as he dashes out of the venue. Bystanders cheer him on, oblivious to the toxicity of his motivations, telling him to hang in there. Cyrus forces his body to move faster, desperate to make it in time to salvage his future. His breath comes in ragged gasps, his lungs burning with the exertion as he complains about the heat and his inability to breathe. Finally, the looming structure of the Earhart estate comes into view, and he announces his arrival to the empty air, exhausted but relieved. He spots Felicia outside the mansion and exhales, grateful that he caught her before she disappeared inside. He attempts to compose himself, noting the cooling effect of the night air, and immediately begins to gaslight himself and her, questioning if she is seriously taking the breakup to heart. He calculates his next move with cold pragmatism, realizing that he must persuade Felicia right here and now, or the Hamer family faces total ruin. Confronting her, Cyrus attempts to rewrite reality, claiming that he obviously does not want to break off the engagement. Felicia, wrapped in the cloak Kevin gave her, challenges this assertion with a skeptical query. Cyrus doubles down, insisting he hasn't considered ending it in the slightest, but Felicia cuts through his defenses by bringing up the third party in their relationship. She points out that Maisie is the one who truly occupies his thoughts. Felicia adopts a self-deprecating tone, echoing the insults hurled at her previously, stating that she is an inadequate fiancée who finally speaks her mind. She suggests that there are plenty of people more suitable for him than she is. Cyrus recoils, begging her to stop saying such cruel things, failing to see the irony. Felicia stands her ground, clarifying that she is merely repeating his own words back to him. She asserts that she had no intention of being cruel, but simply acted as a mirror to his behavior. Desperate, Cyrus plays his final card, declaring that the one he loves is Felicia, not Maisie. The tension is interrupted by the arrival of Alfred, the Earhart family butler, who demands to know what is transpiring in front of the entrance. He immediately notices Felicia's condition and expresses concern, urging her to come inside to her room. Cyrus interjects, commanding Felicia to wait and trying to halt her retreat. Alfred recognizes the intruder, but Cyrus dismisses the servant with contempt. Cyrus shouts that their conversation isn't over yet and orders Alfred not to interfere, his panic mounting. He realizes with dread that if Felicia enters the mansion, his opportunity to manipulate the situation vanishes, and it will all be over. Alfred, maintaining his professional composure despite Cyrus's aggression, scolds the young man for speaking so rudely. He advises Cyrus to calm down, noting that he has lost his cool and cannot think straight. Cyrus tries to insist on talking right now, outside. Alfred's demeanor shifts to disbelief. He points out that Lady Felicia is soaked and freezing, yet Cyrus prioritizes his own need to talk over her physical well-being. He asks if Cyrus is blind to her suffering. Alfred questions the validity of Cyrus's status as a fiancé, observing that he only thinks about his own convenience. The doors open further to reveal mangarecapped, Felicia's father, who steps out demanding to know if something is wrong. He is immediately shocked by his daughter's appearance, exclaiming that she is soaked to the bone. Alfred attempts to explain the situation formally, but Cyrus tries to interject, sweating profusely as he addresses the Marquis, claiming it isn't what he thinks. Cyrus attempts to initiate a discussion, stating he has something to discuss. The Marquis ignores Cyrus's pleas entirely. He issues a cold, final decree. He cannot hear Cyrus out today. He orders the young man to come back another day, effectively banishing him from the premises. Cyrus stands stunned, uttering a weak confirmation as the power dynamic shifts completely. The Marquis turns his attention solely to his daughter, stating that they must get her warmed up first and will talk afterward. He guides Felicia inside, leaving Cyrus stranded on the doorstep. As the heavy doors creak shut, the gap closes on Cyrus's desperate face, followed by the definitive thud of the lock engaging. Safe inside the warm interior of the estate, Felicia sits quietly while her father asks if she has calmed down. With a resolved expression, she addresses him formally, stating her desire to call off her engagement with Cyrus. The Marquis asks what follows that decision, noting that such a declaration is quite sudden. He assumes she must have a reason and invites her to share it. Felicia acknowledges her request is selfish, but her father presses gently, asking specifically what it is about Cyrus that she dislikes. Felicia struggles to articulate her feelings, admitting she isn't confident she can explain it well as the words fail her. The Marquis patiently asks why she feels that way. She begins by admitting that she doesn't think Cyrus is the only one at fault, nor does she actively dislike him in a traditional sense. Instead, she describes a feeling of apathy, realizing that she has started to feel like none of it matters anymore. She reflects on the social insults she endured, recalling how she was called brazen for a baron's daughter and labeled a plain girl. She explains that seeing the way Cyrus looked down on people made her feel deeply uncomfortable. She worries that speaking up now sounds like simple badmouthing, and admits she might be at fault for not speaking up properly at the time. The Marquis listens intently, absorbing her confession. The Marquis probes further, asking why she never called Cyrus out on his behavior. Felicia admits she knew that if she pointed it out, he would only get moody, so she remained silent to keep the peace. She then highlights the double standard in their relationship. She notes that while there were male friends in her circle, Cyrus would go out without her, his fiancée. She reveals that today at the cafe, Cyrus arrived with Maisie. Prompted for more details, Felicia recounts how Cyrus happily agreed with Maisie, and together they mocked her. She adds that Cyrus claimed he hates Barney, and therefore because Felicia gets along with Barney, she is unfit to be his fiancée. The Marquis asks for an example of the behavior she despises. Felicia finally voices the core of her frustration. She hates Maisie. She explains that Maisie does things normal people wouldn't do without a care, and while she can't explain it perfectly, the hatred is visceral. The dam breaks within Felicia. All the thoughtless actions she had endured up until now, everything she had been brooding over, comes pouring out uncontrollably. Flashbacks of Maisie's feigned innocence and Cyrus's neglect flood her mind as she speaks. She admits she couldn't stop the flow of grievances, and her father listens quietly to it all. Felicia soaks her feet in a basin of warm water, the physical warmth contrasting with the pain of her memories. She admits that the insults did hurt. The Marquis validates her pain, asking gently if, despite them seeming trivial to others, they really hurt her. Felicia confirms this, realizing that all the things she couldn't put into words one by one had accumulated to cause her genuine pain and discomfort. She apologizes again, thinking her grievances might seem trivial to everyone else. She continues to detail the hypocrisy she witnessed. She explains that Maisie kept saying over and over that she wanted to go to Barney's family parties too. When Felicia told her there was nothing she could do about it, Maisie, who wasn't allowed to go from the start, teamed up with Cyrus to criticize Felicia for going. Maisie would declare, "I'd never go to such a party," contradicting her own previous desires. Felicia analyzes Maisie's character, wondering if gossip makes people feel more united. She realized that Maisie would always smile at whoever she was with and join them in bad-mouthing the other side. Felicia asserts her own moral stance, stating that if it were her, she wouldn't pretend to get along and wouldn't go to those parties either. She saw Maisie engage in this two-faced behavior often. She describes how Maisie, who hates Barney, teamed up with Cyrus to blame Felicia for being close to him. She recalls Maisie asking, "Felicia, Cyrus isn't important to you, is he?" and notes that Maisie looked truly delighted as she made the accusation. This occurred even though Maisie herself had repeatedly expressed a desire to attend the parties. Felicia concludes that while it might be selfish of her, she hates Maisie's lack of common sense and vulgarity. The Marquis summarizes the situation. Felicia hates Maisie's vulgarity, while Cyrus believed that if Felicia could get along with Barney, it should be fine for him to get along with Maisie. The Marquis states plainly that he doesn't think this situation can be helped. Hearing this validation, Felicia feels a sudden weight lift from her shoulders. The Marquis explains that while looking only at the facts might make Felicia seem selfish, in reality, they are both the same in their stubbornness. He concludes that, in short, they simply don't get along. He advises her that there is no need to force herself to deal with Maisie. Felicia internalizes this relief, realizing she doesn't have to deal with Maisie anymore. The Marquis connects the dots regarding the family's reputation. He realizes that because of this toxic dynamic, the Earhart family ended up being laughed at by everyone, including the Hamer family. Felicia adds that at the cafe, Cyrus was loudly mocking her together with Maisie. The Marquis sees the truth clearly now. Cyrus and Maisie truly get along well. He apologizes to his daughter for what she endured. With a calm, authoritative demeanor, the Marquis announces his decision. He states that since they have finally settled this engagement over such matters, he wishes to call it off entirely. He declares that in that case, they should let Cyrus be with Maisie instead. He promises to personally inform the Hamer family of the annulment. Felicia is stunned by the decisiveness of his action. The Marquis explains his reasoning further. He posits that whether one is right or wrong doesn't really matter. He acknowledges that, as Felicia herself understands, it might not be fair to put all the blame solely on Cyrus. However, the fundamental issue is that Felicia and the Hamers simply don't see things the same way. He asserts that this incompatibility is enough of a reason to end it. Felicia, wrapped in a blanket, asks in disbelief if they can really call off an engagement for that reason. Her father smiles, noting that things are about to get busy, signaling the beginning of the end for the union. The heavy wooden doors of the Earhart estate stood firm, guarding the sanctuary within from the chaotic world outside. Inside the warm, lamplit parlor, the tension of a long night finally dissipated. Marquis Earhart stood tall, his posture relaxing as he received the report that Barney had provided safe passage for the young women. Rosemary and Carla, having returned from their outing, offered their apologies for the worry caused, but the Marquis dismissed their contrition with a wave of relief. His gaze drifted to Felicia, his other daughter, whose expression remained a placid mask of tranquility. It had been an age, he mused, since he last witnessed such a serene countenance upon her face, a stark contrast to the turbulent undercurrents that had defined recent months. The Marquis's mind drifted backward, pulling him into the labyrinth of memory where the family's current predicament had taken root. He recalled the strategic calculations regarding his succession. The original plan had been intricate but sound: marry Felicia to Edgar's son, Barney, thereby securing the lineage. However, fate had intervened, necessitating a shift in strategy. The family pivoted, seeking a husband for Rosemary instead, while simultaneously hunting for a suitable partner for Felicia, a man who would not merely be a spouse, but a husband capable of adopting the Earhart name and shouldering the heavy mantle of the household patriarch. The selection process had been rigorous, a search for a diamond in the rough. The Marquis's standards were exacting, demanding a candidate from the Royal Knights, a sphere where discipline and honor were paramount. He required a handsome appearance to befit the station, undeniable skill with the sword to defend it, and a sensible personality to manage it. Cyrus, the eldest son of the Marquis Hamer, had appeared as the manifestation of these desires. 4 years Felicia's senior, he possessed the pedigree and the exterior polish that promised stability. The Marquis believed he had finally secured the perfect successor. But the mirror of reality often cracks the image of expectation. Upon their first formal meeting, the illusion shattered. Cyrus stood before him not as a titan of industry or a paragon of knightly virtue, but as an utterly ordinary young man, devoid of the spark required to lead a great house. Yet, mediocrity was a sin that could be overlooked. Financial ruin was not. The Marquis's investigations unearthed a rotting core beneath the gilded facade of the Heimer family. The prestigious Heimer lineage was drowning in a sea of red ink. The revelation was damning. Before the engagement papers had even cooled, the Heimer family, utilizing Cyrus as their proxy, had begun to claw at the Earhart coffers. They requested loans with shameless frequency. The Marquis discovered that the Heimer mansion, a symbol of their status and their most fertile, profitable lands, had long since been mortgaged to creditors. They were a family living in a delusion of grandeur, piling debt upon debt to maintain a lifestyle they could no longer afford. The realization struck the Marquis with the force of a physical blow. The Heimers had never intended to offer a partnership, they were offering a parasite. They had counted on the Earhart fortune to act as their life support from the very inception of the arrangement. The Marquis's internal monologue turned scathing. He chastised himself for his lack of suspicion, for failing to see the vultures circling sooner. In the world of high nobility, aid was an investment, a seed planted with the expectation of recovery or growth. To pour gold into the Heimer abyss was not charity, it was folly. He had challenged Cyrus, demanding a concrete strategy, a repayment plan, a sign of competence. Instead, Cyrus had stood before him, a hollow vessel repeating his father's desperate pleas as if the family's ruin were a distant problem unrelated to his own existence. The memory of that confrontation played out vividly in the Marquis's mind. Cyrus had looked away, deflecting responsibility, claiming unfairness in being the sole representative of his family's shame. He parroted his father's words, "We don't have money, so we want financial aid," without a shred of personal accountability. The Marquis had stared at the young man meant to steer the Earhart legacy and saw no captain, only a passenger. He had expected an answer that bridged the gap between the two families, a solution that salvaged dignity. Instead, he received only the echoes of the Heimer parents' greed. Disappointment festered, not just in Cyrus, but in the entire Heimer bloodline. Yet, the Marquis had hesitated. He observed Felicia and Cyrus together in the garden, bathed in sunlight. To the outside world, they appeared the picture of noble bliss, blessed by their peers. Felicia seemed to harbor genuine affection for the man, and Cyrus, in his way, appeared to cherish her. Driven by a father's desire to not crush his daughter's potential happiness, the Marquis had chosen to observe quietly, to let the engagement proceed under strict, unspoken scrutiny. He vowed never to let Felicia enter a marriage that would shackle her to misery. He recalled setting conditions, mental tripwires to test the Heimer integrity. Aristocratic marriages were transactions of power and circumstance, yes, but he drew the line at emotional bankruptcy. He remembered the rumor of a clingy woman's daughter, a shadow from Cyrus's life that threatened to encroach on Felicia's future. The Marquis hardened his heart. He would never entrust his precious daughter to a man who viewed her merely as a walking treasury, a man who grudgingly accepted the role of son-in-law solely to finance his family's decadence. If Cyrus preferred the company of his past, the Marquis decided he was welcome to it, alone. The narrative shifted to the Heimer estate, 2 weeks prior to the present. The atmosphere in the dining hall was thick with panic. The opulent chandelier above, likely mortgaged, cast light on a family in crisis. Marquis Heimer, a man whose face was etched with the sweat of avarice, slammed his utensil down. The ultimatum had been delivered. Without the Earhart aid, the mansion and lands were forfeit. Cyrus sat at the table, his expression a mix of sullen resentment and helplessness. He remained silent as his father berated him, demanding to know why the financial tap had run dry. Cyrus attempted to defend himself, his voice weak against the storm of his parents' entitlement. He explained that he had been denied an audience with Marquis Earhart entirely, barred at the very gates of the estate. The humiliation of being turned away like a common beggar burned him. He recounted how Felicia had invited him on dates, opportunities to smooth things over, but he had foolishly rejected her, citing a lack of time, a lie that now tightened the noose around his family's neck. His father's reaction was explosive. He accused Cyrus of incompetence, blaming the Earhart's cold shoulder on Cyrus's failure to grasp Felicia's heart. The irony was lost on the older man. He failed to see that his own incessant begging had poisoned the well. Cyrus, pushed to the breaking point, snapped back. He declared he had never asked for this role, that he had intended to inherit his own house, not be shipped off like cattle to save a sinking ship. His father retorted with the arrogance of the desperate, claiming he had found Cyrus a fine marriage match, ignoring the reality that they were selling their son for survival. Cyrus's internal resentment boiled over. He thought of the other women who had desired him, soothing his bruised ego with memories of popularity. Yet, the harsh truth remained. None of those admirers came with a dowry large enough to resurrect the Heimer fortune. Only the Earhart family possessed the wealth they required. He admitted to himself that they needed a partner who would learn the grotesque truth of their debts and yet remain unshaken for the sake of appearances, a sacrificial lamb. Felicia was that lamb. The Heimer family's delusion deepened. They sat amidst imported vases and luxury furniture, all of it belonging to the bank, and sneered at the concept of frugality. Cyrus recalled the Marquis Earhart's warning, "Don't you plan to stop living in luxury?" The very suggestion offended them. The Heimer mother, appalled, slammed her hand on the table. To stop living in luxury was, to them, a fate worse than death. They clung to their noble identity as if it were a physical shield, refusing to be laughed at, refusing to reduce their servant staff which outnumbered the wealthy Earharts 2-1. They resolved that they could not continue on this path of denial, yet their solution was not to cut costs, but to force the revenue stream back open. The plan was hatched. Cyrus must win back Felicia's feelings. The father, wiping his mouth, declared he would handle the money talks if Cyrus handled the romance. Cyrus, resigned to his role as the charming lure, agreed. He stood, adjusting his coat, preparing to perform the role of the devoted fiancé once more. 1 week later, the scene shifted to the sun-drenched drawing room of the Earhart mansion. Felicia sat on a plush sofa, her hands moving with rhythmic precision as she embroidered a piece of fabric. Chiku, chiku, chiku. The silence was punctuated only by the soft sound of the needle. Cyrus sat opposite her, his posture stiff, the air between them heavy with unsaid words. He attempted to breach the wall of silence, commenting on how long it had been. Felicia's response was a curt, single-word acknowledgement, her eyes never leaving her work. Desperate to gain footing, Cyrus pressed on, asking if she had been well. Felicia shut him down instantly, stating that her well-being was none of his concern. He tried again, asking about her activities the previous weekend, noting she seemed busy. She rebuffed him again, vague and distant. He tried to schedule a date for the coming weekend. She claimed she had things to do. The conversation was a dying ember. Then Cyrus made the fatal error. In a clumsy attempt to show familiarity or perhaps concern, he asked, "Is Maisie doing well?" The needle stopped. The air in the room froze. Felicia hesitated, her internal monologue revealing the depth of the insult. She offered a noncommittal answer, but internally, the dam broke. She watched Cyrus, seeing him not as a fiancé, but as a man with uselessly high pride, forcing himself to flatter her solely to secure his position as a son-in-law. She realized with crystal clarity that continuing this charade would only lead to mutual unhappiness. She reflected on the accumulation of grievances. She could have overlooked the Heimer debts. She could have endured Cyrus's reluctance to join her family. She might have even tolerated his arrogance and his tendency to look down on others, flaws common enough among the nobility. She had prepared herself to endure all of that. But the mention of Maisie, the daughter of the woman Cyrus truly wanted, the woman he was prioritizing while selling himself to Felicia, was the final straw. Felicia's resentment crystallized. It wasn't hatred for Cyrus himself, but a profound disgust for the situation. She saw a foolish man and a shameless woman who thought they could praise her to her face while stealing what belonged to her. She wanted to cut ties. She wanted them gone. The decision was made. The narrative jumped to the inevitable confrontation. The Heimer family had arrived, expecting a reconciliation or a check. Instead, the Marquis Earhart dropped the guillotine. He announced the annulment of the engagement. Cyrus sat stunned, his mouth agape, while his father stood in shock, unable to process the sudden eviction from their financial paradise. The Earhart servants watched as the Heimers were shown the door. In the aftermath, the Marquis Earhart sat calmly with Felicia. He explained his actions with cold logic. He could not lend money without a prospect of repayment. He had told them to improve their lifestyle, to review their income and expenses, to act like responsible adults. They had refused. The Heimer father had called him cold for speaking to family that way, but the Marquis had countered that lending money that couldn't be repaid was not aid, it was enabling. He revealed his masterstroke. He had known their character all along. He pointed out their lack of dignity, their obsession with money, and the shameful nature of offering their son as a financial product. He admitted to Felicia that he had baited them. By demanding they change their lifestyle, something he knew they would never do, he forced them to reveal their true colors, allowing him to cancel the engagement without making any concessions. The Marquis laughed, a sound of genuine release. He confessed that letting out the pent-up frustration he had held for months felt truly refreshing. He looked at Felicia, who seemed equally unburdened. The parasites were gone. The final scene settled on a quiet moment between the Marquis and Rosemary. With the Heimer issue resolved and Felicia free, the succession problem remained. The Marquis announced his new decision: Rosemary would inherit the house. She would marry Barney, Edgar's son, the original candidate for Felicia. The circle had closed. Rosemary accepted the news with a strange mix of emotions. She didn't dislike Barney. In fact, she liked him. But the shift from friends to spouses felt abrupt, a realignment of her world she hadn't anticipated. The Marquis reassured her she would get used to it quickly and promised to inform Edgar. Rosemary blushed, a small escaping her lips. As the chapter closed, the narrator offered a foreboding whisper. The Marquis believed he had solved the puzzle, that the Ashfield family, Barney's family, would be happy, and the Earhart legacy was secure. However, the final panels lingered on Rosemary's uncertain expression and a tightly gripped piece of fabric. The narrator warned that the father's expectations were about to be betrayed in an unexpected direction, casting a shadow over the seemingly happy resolution. The hallways of the academy buzzed with the hushed, stinging whispers of scandal, the air thick with the kind of rumors that spread faster than plague in high society. Students murmured amongst themselves, their voices laced with a mixture of pity and titillation, discussing the downfall of what they had once deemed a perfect couple. The name, Lord Cyrus of the Heimer family, floated through the corridor, tethered to the shocking revelation that his engagement had been unceremoniously annulled. Observers speculated wildly on what cataclysmic event could have severed such a bond, their imaginations filling the void left by silence. Amidst this swirl of gossip, Felicia walked a gauntlet of concern. Her friends and acquaintances approached her with delicate hesitation, treating her as if she were a porcelain doll fractured by tragedy. They asked if she was all right, their faces etched with worry. The rumor of the broken engagement had permeated every layer of her social existence, from the rigid structures of high society to the intimate circles of the academy. Felicia, maintaining her composure, assured them of her well-being, urging them not to burden themselves with worry on her account. However, the internal reality of Felicia's emotional state stood in stark, ironic contrast to the public perception. While her peers envisioned a heart shattered by rejection, Felicia's internal landscape was populated by feelings of lightness and liberation, visualized as joyous, dancing rabbits celebrating her freedom. She felt completely fine, better, in fact, than she had in months. Yet, the world reacted to her as though she were a fragile object requiring careful handling. This dissonance birthed a strange, paradoxical guilt within her. She felt the weight of their misplaced sympathy, knowing that while they mourned her loss, she was privately relishing her relief. Her friends, oblivious to her true feelings, pressed in with physical comforts, hugging her and offering a listening ear for grievances she did not harbor. They encouraged her not to push herself, soothing her as one would a child. Felicia reflected on the true nature of the events. Cyrus's nasty personality, specifically his bullying of Maisie, had been exposed, leading to the rupture. Since everyone around her was celebrating her escape, and she herself was happy, she reasoned that the current awkwardness was natural. She decided to view the situation as a temporary turbulence, trusting that time would eventually smooth the waters and resolve the misunderstandings. Bolstered by her father's earlier assurances not to worry about the Earhart family's standing, she resolved to endure the pitying glances. Deep within the fortress of the Earhart estate, a secret truth provided Felicia with her stability, a truth that would have silenced the Academy's gossip in an instant. She stood next to Barney, their demeanor suggesting a comfort and intimacy that transcended friendship. The reality was that a new engagement between Felicia and Barney had already been arranged within the scant 3 weeks following the annulment. However, the announcement was being withheld. The families had decided that sharing the news immediately would be premature and potentially scandalous. Felicia planned to reveal it eventually, confident that the truth would reassure those currently worrying about her. The union with Barney was not a sudden, impulsive reaction but the fruition of a plan long held in reserve. The engagement had been considered multiple times by both families in the past. It was only out of consideration for their father's pacing that things had progressed slowly. The families hesitated to announce it immediately, fearing that moving on so quickly would be interpreted as a grave disrespect to Cyrus. The Earhart family, maintaining their dignity, felt a pang of sympathy, worried that a rapid replacement might heap shame upon the man they had just discarded. But while the Earharts exercised caution and respect, the universe had other plans. A few days later, a new shockwave hit the social scene. Without any prior notice or warning, the engagement of Cyrus and Maisie was publicly announced. Felicia was blindsided. While she had been walking on eggshells to protect Cyrus's reputation, he had careened into a new scandal with reckless abandon. The scene shifted to the academy grounds, where the news was met with disbelief. "Is it true that you got engaged to that Cyrus?" a student exclaimed, confronting Maisie. Maisie, basking in the attention, feigned surprise that the news had traveled so fast, complimenting her peer on being well-informed. She accepted the stuttered congratulations with a triumphant air. The mechanics behind this sudden union were far less glamorous than Maisie's beaming face suggested. Felicia reflected on the chaotic lack of courtesy that defined Maisie's actions. It wasn't just a lack of common sense, it was a fundamental inability to manage basic societal expectations. The backstory of the engagement revealed a humiliation. Maisie's stepfather, the timid and kind Uncle Bernard, had been forced to bow his head repeatedly to an enraged Marquis Heimer, apologizing profusely for the situation. Bernard had been dragged into the mess by his wife, unaware until it was too late. Despite the shame her stepfather endured in front of their relatives, Maisie appeared blissfully ignorant of the disgrace. She stood in the center of the social whirlwind, wondering why the adulation wasn't more raucous. She looked around, puzzled, questioning why others were hesitant to acknowledge her victory. In her delusion, she interpreted the coldness of the crowd not as disapproval, but as jealousy. She believed Felicia and the others were envious of her happiness, accusing Felicia in her mind of having a bad attitude simply because Maisie had stolen her cousin's fiancé. Felicia, observing this display, felt a growing sense of incredulity. She noted Maisie's shamelessness, a brazen quality that allowed her to steal not just information but people, without a flicker of remorse. Felicia clarified the timeline in her own mind. She didn't care who Cyrus married because she was the one who had ended things. Cyrus hadn't been stolen, he had been discarded. Yet, strangely, Maisie refused to admit she had stolen Felicia's poetry, a past grievance, but acted as if she had successfully snatched Cyrus away by force, wearing the act of stealing him like a badge of honor. The confrontation in the courtyard deepened the divide. Maisie, surrounded by her sycophants, projected a false sympathy. "Maisie, that's just too cruel," one girl murmured, to which Maisie feigned innocence. They pitted poor Felicia, reinforcing the narrative that Felicia was the victim of a grand theft. Maisie, irritated by any shift in the spotlight, wondered why she was being painted as the villain when she felt justified. Felicia realized that to the outside world, the truth, that only those involved could know, was irrelevant. To the gallery, she was simply the poor girl whose fiancé was pilfered by her cousin. Felicia analyzed Maisie's character with clinical precision. For Maisie, facts and truth were immaterial. Her existence revolved around being noticed and acknowledged. She craved attention like a drug, willing to use any means necessary to secure it. She wanted to be doted on, to be the center of the universe. Felicia acknowledged that the desire for recognition, to be liked, praised, and have a place, was a universal human trait. However, Felicia believed that true recognition required one to think with their own heart and mind, to stand independently on their own 2 feet. As long as one leaned on others and took the easy path, true acknowledgement would remain out of reach. This philosophical divergence brought Felicia back to the practical reality. She was incredibly lucky the engagement had been annulled. The Heimer family was in dire financial straits. Maisie looked happy now, but Felicia questioned if she truly understood the precipice she was dancing on. The Heimer family had shown no intention of cutting back on their luxurious lifestyle or increasing their income. They had simply planned to parasitize the Earhart fortune. Now, they had attached themselves to a new host, but the host was a phantom. A visual diagram illustrated Maisie's transformation from a modest girl to a flashy noblewoman, highlighting the shift in her appearance after and before her mother married into the Goddard family. The gossipers marveled that even though Uncle Bernard and Daphne were married, the connection between Cyrus and Maisie barely made them relatives, yet the scandal felt incestuous. Lady Daphne, Maisie's mother, had married into the Goddard Baron family as Uncle Bernard's second wife. The socialites dissected the Goddard family dynamics. Uncle Bernard was known as a gentle, calm man who worked earnestly at his business and possessed a fair amount of assets. However, ever since he remarried Daphne, he had been completely under her thumb. Daphne was viewed as unpredictable and worrisome. The saving grace for the Goddard legacy was that the family fortune had not gone to Daphne or Maisie. The previous Baroness had ensured that the inheritance went to Agnes, her biological daughter. Since the uncle held the Baron's title merely as Agnes's guardian, the right of succession and the bulk of the wealth were destined for the man who would eventually marry Agnes. This financial reality painted a grim picture for the newlyweds. By now, Daphne might have tried to siphon off assets, but legally, Maisie was entitled to nothing. As the child of the second wife, Maisie had no claim to wealth or status. She might receive a small dowry, but it would not be a fortune. The observers realized the irony. Cyrus had sought a husband's position to solve his family's debt crisis. Now, he was marrying Maisie, who would be practically penniless once she left the Baron's household. Money isn't everything, Felicia mused, but she genuinely wondered how two people with no income and massive debts planned to survive. The Earhart family's stance was clear. The Marquis, Felicia, and her mother believed that the ones truly connected to their family were Uncle Bernard and Agnes, who shared their blood. While they didn't refuse to accept the uncle's new family, they found it hard to embrace people who felt so shady. If Daphne and Maisie had been normal people, coexistence might have been possible. Felicia recalled her mother's initial plea to get along with Maisie because she was a cousin, but their senses were fundamentally mismatched. Felicia struggled to define normal, but settled on the concept of an aesthetic sense that her father had once debated with Marquis Heimer. To the Earharts, a life spent shamelessly leaning on others to satisfy one's own greed was devoid of pride and beauty. For people who lived only for money, Felicia felt a faint but growing disgust. She resolved that she did not want to live in a way that only prioritized herself. Blessed with economic and social standing, she felt a duty to live beautifully, a sentiment she knew her family shared. The sheer absurdity of the Heimer-Maisie match lay in the double-blind ignorance of the parties involved. The engagement had been arranged by Lady Daphne and the Heimer family without Uncle Bernard's involvement. The Heimer family did not realize that Maisie had no inheritance rights or wealth. Conversely, Maisie and Lady Daphne were completely unaware that the Heimer family was in financial distress. It was a collision of two parties, each believing the other to be their financial savior, both destined for a rude awakening. Returning to the sanctuary of her home, Felicia was greeted by Alfred, the butler. He informed her that Barney was there, along with another guest. Felicia, assuming it was a casual friend of Rosemary's, prepared to greet them, thinking they would be in the reception room or study. She questioned who it could be, reasoning that if they were chatting with Rosemary and Barney, it wouldn't be anyone too formal. She entered the room with a polite, "Good day, Barney." Barney responded casually, but as Felicia's eyes adjusted to the occupants of the room, her composure faltered. Standing there was a figure she hadn't expected. "Kevin," she breathed. The parlor atmosphere shifts abruptly as Kevin makes his entrance, the heavy wooden doors swinging open to reveal him in his immaculate dark coat and vest. Felicia freezes, her heart hammering against her ribs, not out of romance, but out of sheer mortification. She stands paralyzed near the sofa, acutely aware of her casual attire. Her mind races back to their previous encounter in the freezing cold, where she had been bundled up and covered in snow, and she laments that fate seems determined to let him see her only when she is at her least presentable. Her internal scream of frustration remains trapped behind her lips as Kevin offers a warm, polite greeting, his demeanor calm and collected, contrasting sharply with her internal chaos. Kevin steps further into the room, his attention fixed on her. He inquires about her well-being, noting that the last time they crossed paths, the weather had been unforgiving. He expresses genuine relief to see her looking healthy and safe, his eyes softening with sincerity. Felicia manages a stammered gratitude, her cheeks flushing slightly at his concern. He then pivots the conversation to a subject that makes her stiffen, her poetry. He asks if she is still writing, his voice laced with gentle curiosity. Felicia averts her gaze, clutching a teacup as if it were a lifeline. She offers a muted affirmative, admitting she still writes, but the admission lacks the spark of passion it once held. Memory drags her back to a painful realization. She recalls the day she had planned to tell him something important, only to be crushed by her failure in the Royal Poetry Contest preliminaries. The shame of that memory burns. She confesses to Kevin that since that day, and the embarrassment of failing while he cheered her on, her pen has felt heavy. She explains that she now only manages to complete class assignments. Even when her instructors read her work aloud as exemplary models, she feels a disconnect. The trauma of her previous failure lingers, blocking her ability to write with the freedom she once possessed. She reveals that whenever she attempts to compose something genuine, the awful sensation of inadequacy returns, paralyzing her hand. Kevin listens intently, picking up on a specific phrase she murmurs about "a lot happening" since then. He presses for details, his brow furrowing. This prompt triggers a recounting of the events involving her younger sister, Rosemary, and the revelation of Maisie's treachery. The narrative shifts to the recent past, where Rosemary, brimming with righteous indignation and sporting twin tails that bounce with her animated gestures, confronts the group. Rosemary points an accusatory finger, declaring that Maisie stole Felicia's poems. The revelation shocks the room. Rosemary explains how she overheard Maisie discussing the theft with Cyrus, confirming the plagiarism. Rosemary continues her tirade, detailing how she and Barney stopped by a shop on the way home from school and overheard Rachel and others discussing Maisie's work. The gossipers had noted that the high-quality portions of Maisie's poetry seemed suspiciously familiar, specifically reminiscent of Felicia's style, while the parts Maisie wrote herself were noticeably inferior. Rosemary recounts this with clenched fists, furious on her sister's behalf. She dismisses the scolding she receives for eavesdropping, arguing that she was merely sitting in a chair and the information floated to her. Her defense is fierce. She lists Maisie's other offenses, such as pretending to discover shops and books that Felicia had recommended, effectively copying Felicia's entire personality. The litany of Maisie's social crimes continues. Rosemary complains about Maisie's behavior at Barney's party, describing how the girl bossed the maids around and clung to Felicia, pestering her relentlessly with questions about why she couldn't attend certain events. Rosemary paints a picture of a manipulative, taste-deficient girl who feigns timidity but acts with aggressive selfishness. She notes that Maisie constantly uses the excuse of having no other friends to monopolize Felicia's time, refusing to engage in solitary activities like reading. The group absorbs this information, the realization of Maisie's toxic influence becoming undeniable. The conversation pivots to Felicia's own choices. The group questions why Felicia allowed Maisie to tag along on her date with Cyrus. Felicia attempts to defend herself, explaining that Maisie is an expert at guilt-tripping, playing the victim so effectively that refusal becomes impossible without looking like a villain. She recounts how Maisie begged, and how Cyrus, rather than establishing boundaries, simply agreed to the intrusion. The frustration in the room mounts as they realize the extent of Felicia's passivity and Cyrus's indifference. Kevin, who has been listening with growing intensity, cuts through the noise. He leans forward, his gaze piercing Felicia's defenses. He challenges her directly, asserting that she never actually held romantic love for Cyrus. Felicia recoils, stammering a denial, but Kevin presses on. He observes that while everyone else congratulated her and envied her position, she seemed merely satisfied with the status of being a fiancée rather than the person she was engaged to. He points out the cold reality of noble marriages, where duty often supersedes emotion, but argues that true love manifests as a desire for intimacy and privacy, something she never sought with Cyrus. Rosemary chimes in, reinforcing Kevin's analysis. She states bluntly that Felicia has shown zero signs of regret regarding the breakup with Cyrus. The truth settles heavily on Felicia. She cannot deny that her relief outweighs her heartbreak. She admits, with a small, liberated smile, that she does not regret the annulment. The atmosphere in the room tightens instantly as Kevin shifts his posture. He announces that, given her lack of regret, he has a request regarding his own proposal to make her his wife. He asks, with a sudden, jarring seriousness, if they can call the engagement off. Felicia is blindsided. The rejection strikes her, but she maintains her composure, asking only for the reason while trying to salvage their friendship. She values his presence in her life more than the title of wife and agrees to the friendship. Kevin immediately realizes he has communicated poorly. He clarifies, frantic to correct the misunderstanding. He explains that he doesn't want to lose his best friend, but his wording was clumsy. He reveals the source of his panic. Barney had told him that Felicia might become Barney's wife. This misinformation terrified Kevin, causing him to rush and beg for a chance before he lost her completely. He confesses that the thought of her marrying someone else and looking at them with affection hurt him deeply. Kevin drops to one knee, the playfulness vanishing from his demeanor, replaced by raw sincerity. He looks up at Felicia, the sunlight framing his earnest expression. He asks her, formally and clearly this time, to be his wife. He confesses that he fell in love with her at first sight when they met at the church, a time when she was already engaged. He describes the torture of reading her poems, which only deepened his fascination with her soul, and his struggle to give up on her because she belonged to another. He admits that when the annulment was announced, hope flared, only to be threatened by the rumor of Barney's proposal. He pours out his heart, explaining that he panicked and begged for a chance because he couldn't bear the thought of letting her slip away again. He emphasizes that he wants to prioritize her feelings above all else. He desires marriage, but only if she shares his intent. He asks her to marry him but qualifies it immediately by stating he wants to hear her true feelings before formally finalizing anything. Rosemary, watching from the sidelines, clasps her hands together in delight, cheering for her sister. Felicia, however, is overwhelmed. Her face flushes, and she struggles to process the deluge of information. Kevin, seeing her flustered state, retreats slightly. He apologizes for springing this on her so suddenly and acknowledges that she cannot possibly answer immediately. He offers her the grace of time, suggesting she give him her answer on another day. Left alone with her thoughts, Felicia navigates a storm of emotions. She reflects on the revelation that Kevin has harbored these feelings for so long. She thinks back to the day of the annulment, remembering how she tried to act strong while seeing no future for herself. In that void of anxiety and fear, Kevin had been her pillar. His presence had warmed her heart. The knowledge that the person she admired and respected, the person whose support meant everything to her, actually loves her, brings an undeniable wave of happiness. Yet doubt lingers. She questions the nature of her own feelings. In her world, noble marriages do not require love, but Kevin is offering something more, and she feels unprepared to meet it. Days pass. The scene shifts to the courtyard of the Ashfield estate. Sunlight dapples the stone path as Felicia and Kevin meet again. She apologizes for using Barney to arrange the meeting, but Kevin dismisses the formality. She hands him the coat she had borrowed, thanking him for its warmth and apologizing for the delay in its return. The physical exchange of the coat serves as a bridge to the emotional conversation that must follow. Felicia meets his gaze, her expression solemn but resolute. She tells him that hearing his confession of love made her incredibly happy. She admits to being a fan of his, respecting him deeply and feeling immense gratitude. However, she pivots to the source of her hesitation. She explains that she currently does not feel entitled to accept his love. She confesses that the kindness she once held toward others has frayed, and her poetic voice, the very thing he praised, is in shambles. She describes her internal landscape as a mess. The failure at the Royal Poetry Contest preliminaries destroyed her confidence, sending her into a slump where she no longer understands what her own poetry is supposed to be. She feels that the woman standing before him now is not the Felicia he fell in love with, but a fractured version of herself. She asserts that she needs to rediscover who she is, and the only path she knows to that self-discovery is through her writing. She makes a counterproposal. She wants to write poetry again, to stay true to herself and recover her identity. She asks Kevin to wait for her answer until she finishes her next entry for the Royal Poetry Contest. She wants to face him not as a broken girl, but as someone she can be proud of, someone worthy of the love he offers. Kevin absorbs her terms without hesitation. He assures her there is no need to rush. He agrees to wait, his smile gentle and reassuring. He reiterates that he never wanted to force her or risk being hated. He reminds her of his previous words. He looks forward to seeing a poem that is truly hers. His acceptance relieves the tension in Felicia's shoulders, but Kevin is not finished. He steps closer, closing the distance between them in the garden. He sets a condition of his own. While he is willing to wait for her answer, he declares his intention to make her fall for him in the meantime. He announces that he will do his absolute best to show her his good side, to court her properly, and to earn her love just as she seeks to earn her own self-respect. The recap concludes with Kevin shifting into what the narrative dubs serious mode, his determination radiating off him. Felicia, blushing furiously, realizes that the dynamic has changed. She acknowledges that she cannot simply remain passive, she will have to push herself as well. She suggests they go tell Barney that the uncertainty is over, marking the beginning of a new chapter where both strive to become worthy of the other. In the sun-drenched, glass-walled corner of an upscale cafe, the air hung heavy with the scent of roasted coffee and the murmurs of high society scandal. 3 young noblemen sat clustered around a small table, their postures relaxed but their voices laced with judgment. They dissected the recent social upheaval involving the Hamer family, specifically focusing on Cyrus. One man, leaning his chin on his palm, scoffed at the very notion of Cyrus's recent decisions, suggesting that the heir could have secured a far superior match. The conversation drifted toward the bewildering rumor that Cyrus was now engaged to Maisie. They exchanged skeptical glances, struggling to rationalize the union. While the Goddards possessed a certain degree of wealth, they were merely barons, a rank that paled in comparison to the Marquis House of Hamer. The men analyzed the hierarchy with cold, aristocratic precision. For a groom's family, marrying down in rank but up in liquidity was not the worst tactical maneuver, yet it seemed beneath the dignity of a marquis's heir. One of the men, perhaps a younger son of a viscount himself, noted that such a deal, inheriting both fortune and title, would be palatable for someone in his position, but for Cyrus, it reeked of desperation. They speculated that if the inheritance included both money and status, one might tolerate Maisie's eccentricities, but the consensus remained that the Goddard family was simply too low on the social ladder to match the Hamer prestige. The conversation took a sharper turn as they critiqued Cyrus's handling of his previous fiancée, Felicia Earhart. One man blamed Cyrus entirely, asserting that his inability to maintain a relationship with Felicia was the root of the chaos. He argued that while Felicia might possess plain looks and a dull personality, a cruel assessment that drew nods of agreement, her status was rock solid. To discard the stability of the Earhart connection seemed like madness. They questioned what possibly could have driven Cyrus to break ties with such a powerful family willingly. The reality, they surmised, was that Cyrus had thrown a tantrum, severing the bond prematurely and leaving himself in a precarious position where few noble ladies would dare associate with him. The narrative lens shifted to Cyrus himself, isolated and sweating as he walked alone, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. His internal monologue revealed a frantic, defensive mind. He acknowledged the harsh truth. Right after breaking off a high-profile engagement, his value on the marriage market had plummeted. No respectable lady from a high-ranking house would agree to be a replacement bride on such short notice unless she was truly desperate. He needed a partner immediately, specifically one who could offer financial salvation to his crumbling house. His options had evaporated, leaving him with only one viable path: Maisie. Cyrus attempted to justify the match to himself, fighting back the creeping realization of his own folly. He told himself that his family had no time and no other options. They had to settle. He tried to elevate Maisie in his mind, focusing on her father, the wealthy Baron Goddard. He grasped at straws, recalling rumors that Maisie was well regarded for her poetry and harbored ambitions of becoming a court poet. In the complex ecosystem of the nobility, artistic prestige could sometimes bridge the gap of lineage. He remembered Felicia once explaining that noble daughters viewed the role of a court poet or musician as prestigious, much like how younger sons of lower nobles revered the royal knights. It was a career that could transform a life, offering honor even to those with poor marriage prospects. Cyrus clung to this hope. If Maisie could achieve such a status, perhaps her lower lineage would be overlooked. However, doubt gnawed at him. He knew that for anyone to be selected as a court poet, they usually needed to be chosen for the royal poetry collection first. He recalled that Felicia was no slouch in this arena. She, along with Rachel of the Winter Earls, possessed genuine talent. Felicia had even won an honorable mention in the collection previously. The memory of Felicia's admiration for Lady Weiss, the youngest winner of the top prize and a current jury member, surfaced. Lady Weiss's poetry was revered, described as words that felt alive. Cyrus knew that winning the top prize in the Royal Poetry Collection was the fastest track to becoming a court poet, a fact universally acknowledged in their circle. His mind darkened as he recalled the friction between the girls. Felicia was paranoid that Maisie had stolen her poems. Cyrus dismissed this inconvenient thought, choosing instead to believe that if Maisie was confident enough to aim for the same level as Felicia, who had already been recognized, then perhaps Maisie had a chance. He tried to laugh off his anxieties, but the facade crumbled as the true, humiliating reasons for his rush resurfaced. Two driving forces propelled Cyrus's hasty engagement. First, the preservation of the Hamer family pride was paramount. If the public discovered that he was the one who had been dumped, the shame would be unbearable. He needed to control the narrative, to appear as the one moving on. Second, and far more pressing, was the financial ruin threatening his house. Flashbacks of a confrontation with his father assaulted his memory. His father, a man with a hardened, desperate expression, had commanded him to find a house he could marry into immediately. A dowry alone would be insufficient. The Hamer family was beyond saving with mere pocket change. They needed actual, substantial wealth. When Cyrus had protested, reminding his father that he was the eldest son and heir, his father had ruthlessly suggested that the younger brothers could marry later. The priority was survival. Cyrus felt the injustice of it all. Why was he the only one suffering? The scene transitioned to a classroom setting, where the atmosphere was thick with academic pressure. Maisie sat at her desk, struggling. Her internal monologue betrayed a complete lack of genuine inspiration. She confessed to herself that she could not write poetry. The words simply would not come. She stared at a blank page, her pen frozen. She blamed her writer's block on the fear that her work might be stolen again, a psychological projection to mask her own incompetence. However, her eyes drifted to a notebook, one that the visual narrative implied was not her own. She scanned the pages until she found a specific line that sparked a reaction. Her eyes widened, and a sinister grin of opportunity spread across her face. She had found something usable. Moments later, the teacher called upon Maisie to present her work. Maisie stood, holding her notebook, and began to recite. The verses described a breeze gently caressing a subject, who in turn transforms into a butterfly or a petal in response to that gentle touch. As she spoke the words, a shockwave rippled through the room. At a nearby desk, a student recognized the lines instantly. It was the specific phrasing about the breeze and the butterfly. The student's face twisted in disbelief and outrage as she realized Maisie was reciting lines that belonged to someone else. The realization that Maisie had peeked at another student's notebook and was now passing the work off as her own hung heavily in the air, though no one interrupted the performance. The teacher, oblivious to the plagiarism, moved the class forward, calling on Felicia next. Felicia stood, but her demeanor was shattered. She clutched her paper, her expression one of distress and defeat. The verses she had prepared were now compromised, or perhaps the emotional toll of hearing her own stolen concepts recited by Maisie had scattered her focus. She stammered, admitting that her poem was a mess. From the back of the room, distinct, cruel laughter erupted. Two girls sat snickering, finding entertainment in Felicia's public struggle. The sound of their mockery cut through the tension, prompting a sharp rebuke from a classmate. The defender slammed her hand down, glaring at the laughing girls. She chastised them, declaring that mocking someone's poem was the only truly shameful and laughable act in the room. She demanded that such unladylike behavior cease immediately, silencing the bullies. The teacher, regaining control of the room, proceeded to announce the results. Among the graduates, 6 would be judged on their final poem. However, for the day's session, the teacher declared Maisie's poem the best work, offering congratulations. The announcement landed like a physical blow to those who knew the truth. The teacher continued, explaining the stakes. One student would be chosen as the graduation representative. She noted that many students seemed off their game that day, a subtle jab that stung Felicia. The class erupted in chatter as the teacher detailed the upcoming honor. After the graduation ball, the representative would present their poem before royalty and foreign dignitaries. Furthermore, Lady Weiss, the foremost authority on poetry, would be there to critique them personally. The teacher emphasized that this was a tremendous honor and often the gateway to a position as a court poet. As the class dismissed, the dynamic between the girls shifted into a direct confrontation. Maisie, feigning a sweet and victimized persona, approached Felicia. She offered a sarcastic condolence, calling it tough luck. She then spun a narrative of her own persecution, thanking Felicia but loudly worrying that people would accuse her of stealing again, both poems and Cyrus. This manipulation was calculated to paint herself as the target of rumors. Felicia, flanked by her supportive friend Rachel, looked at Maisie with a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. She clarified immediately that she did not believe Cyrus was stolen. She viewed the engagement break as something that couldn't be helped and held no possessiveness over him. However, her tone shifted when she addressed the poetry. Maisie began to cry, loud, theatrical sobs, asking if Felicia was okay and accusing her of being sly. Rachel, having none of it, stepped forward. She cut through the theatrics, stating clearly that whispering behind backs was shameful and that they should speak outright. Rachel leveled a direct accusation at Maisie. She pointed out that Maisie's work was a patchwork of other people's writing stitched together, which she then insisted was her own original creation. Rachel noted that she knew no one else who operated that way, hiding behind excuses of just referencing or being inspired. Maisie trembled, her fake tears drying up as the accuracy of the accusation hit home. Rachel affirmed she wasn't trying to be mean, but merely stating the truth. Felicia then stepped closer, her expression hardening. She told Maisie that she would let the incident with the notebook go for now. However, she issued a stern warning. Even if Maisie felt secure in her victory today, she would not be able to beat Felicia or Rachel in the long run. Felicia declared with quiet intensity that next time, she would write an even better poem, one that could not be mimicked or stolen. With that final decree, Felicia turned on her heel and walked away. But as soon as she was out of Maisie's line of sight, her composure fractured. She slumped against a wall in the corridor, her legs trembling. She admitted to herself that her bold declaration had been mere bravado. A nervous laughter escaped her lips as the adrenaline faded. She felt the crushing weight of the situation. She couldn't afford to lose to Maisie, not when she had someone waiting for her, someone she needed to make proud. But the page in front of her mind remained blank. Overwhelmed by a creative slump that felt like a physical barrier, Felicia decided she needed to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the academy. She muttered to herself that if getting out of a slump were easy, she wouldn't be suffering. Her feet carried her aimlessly until she found herself wandering toward the training grounds, drawn perhaps by the rhythmic sounds of exertion. At the training grounds, the scene was a stark contrast to the stifling classroom. Sunlight bathed the stone arena where knights and students practiced their martial arts. Felicia spotted a familiar figure in the center of the action, Kevin. He was sparring, his movements fluid and powerful, sweat glistening on his brow as he executed a strike. He shouted with vigor, his enthusiasm for the sword palpable. Kevin noticed Felicia standing at the perimeter and paused, his expression brightening instantly. He called out to her, asking what was wrong. Felicia, observing his dedication, asked him a question that had been lingering in her mind. She queried why he was so devoted to the sword. Kevin, wiping his brow, downplayed it initially, saying he wasn't that devoted, but then his expression grew earnest. He explained his motivations with a clarity that resonated with Felicia. He wanted to protect the people of their country. He wanted to be of use to his brother, a man he deeply respected. And with a flash of competitive fire, he admitted he wanted to finally beat Adrian at the next tournament. His reasons were layered: duty, familial love, and personal ambition. Kevin then turned the focus back to Felicia. He noticed her demeanor was still heavy. He asked how her writing was going. Felicia hesitated, then admitted the truth. She told him she couldn't write. Despite her earlier declaration to Maisie, she was trapped in a slump she couldn't break. She apologized, feeling as though she were failing him. Kevin's reaction was immediate and supportive. He revealed that he hadn't just been out for a walk. He had been thinking of a way to help her. He proposed a solution that made Felicia's eyes widen. He invited her to the palace library. He promised to arrange it so she could visit. Felicia gasped, overwhelmed by the offer. The palace library was a sanctuary of knowledge, restricted and rare. She stammered that she wasn't royalty or a servant, implying she had no right to be there. Kevin dismissed her fears with a confident smile. He reminded her that she was an honorable mention in the royal poetry collection, giving her legitimacy. He stepped closer, his gaze intense and encouraging. He told her that there were countless books in that library she had never seen, works that could broaden her horizons and reignite her poetic voice. He expressed a simple, heartfelt desire. He wanted to help her. The sincerity in Kevin's eyes and the grandeur of his offer struck Felicia deeply. Her heart began to race, a thump echoing in her chest that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with affection. She flushed, asking if such a thing was really okay. Kevin confirmed it with a beaming smile, promising to come pick her up next time. The chapter concluded with Felicia left breathless, her creative despair replaced by the thrill of a new possibility and the warmth of Kevin's unwavering support. The atmosphere within the royal palace of the Acrand Kingdom shifted as Prince Kevin guided Felicia through the corridors. Though Felicia harbored internal anxieties about the propriety of her presence, wondering if their excursion was truly acceptable, Kevin urged her forward with a reassuring demeanor, insisting she worry less. He ushered her toward a set of grand double doors, and as they swung open, Felicia's breath caught in her throat. Before her lay the palace library, a magnificent architectural triumph housing a dizzying array of knowledge. The sheer volume of books was overwhelming, a literal feast for the eyes that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the high, vaulted ceilings. Kevin, ever the considerate host, suggested he would secure seats for them while she browsed to her heart's content, promising to reunite with her shortly. Left to her own devices, Felicia navigated the towering shelves, her eyes scanning the spines of rare and precious volumes. She paused before a particular shelf, her attention arrested by a title resting just out of reach. It was the Madame Amelia's Imaginary Cookbook of Poems, a legendary out-of-print anthology she recognized instantly by its cover. This was a phantom book, a niche foreign publication that had never seen a reprint, making its presence here a testament to the library's depth. As she stretched upward, straining to claim the prize, a presence materialized beside her. Kevin, having returned silently, slid into her personal space with a playful, fluid motion, intending to retrieve the book for her. Felicia recoiled in a flustered panic, insisting that she could not possibly allow a prince of the realm to perform menial labor on her behalf. Kevin laughed off her propriety, assuring her it was fine, but she remained adamant. From a distance, Kevin watched her gentle refusal, his expression softening into one of profound affection. Leaning against a pillar, he rested his chin in his gloved hand, contemplating his future. He reflected on his upcoming submission to the Royal Poetry Collection, a work that would double as his graduation piece. His resolve hardened. He wished to dedicate his writing to the pillars of support in his life, and as his gaze lingered on Felicia, bathed in the soft light of the library, the subject of his inspiration became undeniably clear. Suddenly, the intimate atmosphere was pierced by the arrival of Adrian, who approached the pair with an exuberant, knowing grin. He teased Kevin openly, remarking on the delight of seeing the two of them together. Felicia, realizing she had monopolized the prince's time, immediately apologized to the knight, introducing herself formally as Felicia of House Earhart. Adrian waved off the formality, revealing that his family were avid poetry enthusiasts and that he was already well aware of her reputation as a writer of wonderful verses. He praised her talent, causing Felicia to blush and humble herself, insisting she was the one intruding. Adrian continued, mentioning that Marquis Earhart had expressed a desire to meet promising young poets, suggesting a future meeting. But then, the knight's tone shifted to a mischievous lilt. He recalled a recurring topic Kevin had supposedly mentioned, a romantic trope from literature known as the High Ridge engagement. Adrian recited the lore aloud. A person whose poetry is beautiful is likened to a suitor who climbs high peaks to retrieve an edelweiss flower. Kevin's composure shattered. He stammered, trying to silence his guard, his face flushing crimson as he hurriedly dragged Adrian away, claiming they had urgent duties to attend to. As Kevin retreated, he glanced back at Felicia with a frantic energy, leaving her confused by the sudden outburst. Alone once more, Felicia returned to her reading, sitting in the quiet luxury of the library. She marveled at the skill within the rare books, noting the deft use of personification that she found deeply inspiring. A fire ignited within her. She felt a competitive drive to push her own writing further, not wanting to lose to the masters of the past. Yet, her mind drifted back to the earlier conversation. The mention of the edelweiss triggered a memory. Kevin had given her that very flower at a party, a gesture she had interpreted through the common language of flowers as courage. Curiosity piqued, she located a book titled High Ridge Engagement on the desk. As she opened it, she wondered if the flower carried a meaning beyond simple bravery. The text revealed a fairy tale. Once, in a far-off land, a beautiful girl lost her smile due to a cruel fiancé. To restore her joy, her childhood friend embarked on a perilous journey, climbing a high mountain to retrieve the edelweiss, the flower she once loved. Her reading was interrupted by the heavy thud of footsteps. She looked up to see a dark-haired man in royal regalia staring down at her with an imposing, icy gaze. It was Prince Theodore, the first prince of the Akran Kingdom and Kevin's older brother. Theodore wasted no time. He ordered the room cleared, the heavy doors shutting them in. He commanded Felicia to sit, identifying her immediately as the daughter of Marquis Earhart. Felicia, trembling, confirmed her identity. Theodore's voice was cold as he revealed he had gathered intelligence on her from his men, cutting through her attempts to define her relationship with Kevin as mere friendship. He accused her directly of manipulation. In his eyes, she was a woman keeping his younger brother's proposal on hold while enjoying the privileges of royal intimacy, a stance he labeled as disrespectful to the royal family. Felicia gripped her dress, the fabric bunching under her fingers as she acknowledged the truth of the situation, even if the path had been her choice. Theodore's ultimatum was brutal. He demanded she tell Kevin she would never marry him, forcing the prince to give up. In exchange, knowing she had recently broken an engagement and required a match, Theodore offered to take her as his own concubine. He warned her that if the royal house issued a formal proposal, she would lack the power to refuse. Felicia's mind reeled. The concept of becoming Theodore's mistress was abhorrent, a nightmare she couldn't process. Terror gripped her, but amidst the fear, a contrasting image of Kevin rose in her mind. She knew Kevin despised the abuse of unearned power. He understood the weight of his station better than anyone and rejected the very tyranny Theodore was now displaying. Theodore pressed her, asking for her true feelings before he made the order official. He leaned in, questioning if she truly believed she had the option to reject a royal command. Summoning every ounce of her resolve, Felicia looked the first prince in the eye. "No. I refuse," she declared. Theodore paused, asking her to repeat herself. Felicia stood her ground. She admitted she lacked confidence and could not even write properly yet, but her heart was certain. She did not want to marry anyone but Prince Kevin. She proclaimed her goal to win the top royal poetry prize, to become someone worthy of standing beside him through her own merit. She remembered how Kevin supported her when she was hurting, and she desired to return that support, not as a pawn, but as an equal. She stated firmly that nothing Theodore said would make her give up on Kevin. The tension in the room snapped. Theodore's menacing facade dissolved instantly into boisterous laughter. He slapped the table, declaring that she got it. He revealed the entire interrogation was a test. The threat of making her a concubine was a lie. Felicia, still trembling, looked at him in bewilderment. Theodore's expression softened into one of genuine brotherly concern. He explained that he needed to ensure she wasn't a fortune hunter seeking to exploit the royal family or his brother's kindness. Seeing her fierce defense of Kevin and her desire for self-improvement proved her sincerity. He bowed his head to her, apologizing profusely for the cruel things he had said to test her mettle. Felicia, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal, tried to humble herself, but Theodore insisted. He thanked her, expressing his relief that the person his brother loved was a woman of such character. As he prepared to leave, checked by his attendant who signaled the time, Theodore offered her a parting wish. He hoped her name would be among the top poets at graduation and that she would stand proudly beside Kevin. Before exiting, Theodore glanced at the book Felicia had been reading, the one about the Edelweiss. He noted the bookmark she used, which bore the image of the flower. He advised her to read the story to the very end, dropping a cryptic hint that the flower meant far more than just courage. He remarked that his brother had more game than he let on, leaving Felicia with that final puzzle. Adrian appeared to escort Felicia home, finding her still reeling from the encounter. As they walked, Felicia opened the book to the final pages to heed Theodore's advice. She read the conclusion of the legend. The childhood friend, battered and hurt from his climb, returned with the Edelweiss. He handed it to the woman and said, "I'll make you smile, please marry me." The woman, moved by his dedication, accepted the flower and his proposal, her smile restored. The realization struck Felicia with the force of a physical blow. In the Akrand kingdom, giving a woman an Edelweiss was synonymous with a marriage proposal. She pieced the timeline together. Kevin had given her the flower at the party, knowing exactly what it meant. He had proposed to her silently, right in front of everyone. But because she was still entangled in a previous engagement and dealing with emotional trauma, he had kept the true meaning to himself to avoid pressuring her. He had hidden his feelings to ensure she wouldn't feel cornered, waiting for her to come to him on her own terms. Adrian confirmed her realization, noting that Kevin likely wanted to see her that day even for a brief moment, despite his packed schedule, which was why he brought her to the library. Overcome with emotion, Felicia asked Adrian where Kevin was. He directed her to the courtyard, where the prince was resting. Felicia rushed to the spot, her heart pounding. She found Kevin asleep on a bench, exhausted from his duties. She reached out, intending to wake him, but hesitated. Seeing his peaceful face, she decided to let him rest. She gazed at him, her heart overflowing with love and new understanding. She realized that if it was Kevin, she could believe in a future together. She silently vowed to let her hidden resolve ride the tip of her pen, pouring her feelings into the poetry that would eventually pave her way to his side. Felicia Earhart stood in the sanctity of her private quarters, her hands trembling slightly as they clutched a sheet of high-quality parchment. The official seal of the royal palace glared up at her, confirming the sender's identity and adding a tangible weight to the paper. It was a letter from Prince Theodore, the first prince of the Akrand kingdom, and its contents sent a jolt of nervous energy coursing through her veins. Her eyes scanned the script, fixating on a postscript that felt less like a polite closing and more like a direct command. Theodore had written, "P.S. Don't keep Kevin waiting any longer than you already have." The bluntness of the message forced Felicia to confront the reality of her situation. Theodore had read her poem, the one she had poured her soul into, and his feedback was glowing. He described it as a brilliant work overflowing with talent, noting that it was no surprise his younger brother, Kevin, had become such a fan. The letter concluded with a directive that felt monumental: do your best to win the grand prize in the Royal Poetry Selection. Felicia lowered the letter, her mind racing. This was an endorsement from the future ruler of the nation, a clear signal that the royal family not only condoned her potential union with Prince Kevin but actively supported it. The realization washed over her. She had received the backing for an engagement to a prince. Yet, instead of pure elation, a crushing sense of responsibility settled upon her shoulders. The pressure to perform, to justify this high-level support, became intense and suffocating. She paced the room, her thoughts spiraling. While the support was an honor, the condition attached to it, the successful completion of the Royal Poetry Anthology, created a timeline she wasn't sure she could meet. She questioned the propriety of keeping the engagement on hold until her work was finished, wondering if she was stretching the royal family's patience too thin. Her internal deliberation was interrupted by the presence of her sister, Rosemary, who offered a perspective Felicia hadn't fully considered. Rosemary pointed out the political and familial benefits of the match. With Felicia marrying into the royal family, the pressure on the Earhart lineage shifted. Specifically, Prince Kevin was the second prince, which meant his union with Felicia would bring immense prestige to their house without the direct burden of the throne falling on the Earhart line. Rosemary beamed, her hands clasped together in delight. She revealed that if the family no longer required a groom to marry into the Earhart house to continue the name, she was free to pursue her own heart. She announced her desire to get engaged to Barney/Bernie, realizing for the first time that her path to him was now clear. Rosemary's joy was infectious, her logic sound. The royal palace seemed supportive because the marriage added prestige, and if Felicia won the grand prize, the match would be unassailable. Felicia let out a long sigh of relief, the tension ebbing slightly. She hadn't realized Rosemary harbored such deep feelings for Barney, and the sudden resolution of her sister's romantic future lifted a weight off her conscience. Rosemary cheered her on, wishing her luck with the poem, her enthusiasm bubbling over. However, as the reality of the situation sank in, Felicia's mind conjured a vivid, almost hallucinatory image of her current predicament. She visualized herself trapped in a castle tower, surrounded by a moat that was rapidly being filled in. In this mental landscape, Kevin operated a heavy excavator marked Future Ride, dumping earth into the water with relentless efficiency, while Rosemary stood by the shore, shoveling dirt with a cheerful "Washoy" chant. They were systematically eliminating her defenses, closing the gap between her and the inevitability of the marriage. The moat was vanishing at an insane pace, leaving her with nowhere to retreat. She realized she had to do this. She had to write the poem. Later, at the academy, the atmosphere buzzed with the murmur of students gathering around the notice boards. A printed list had been posted, displaying a string of cryptic codes and names. This was the announcement for the honor students, specifically the tier just below the top, a preliminary revelation before the graduation ceremony. Felicia approached the board, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that at Crane Academy, while the very top student was only announced on stage during graduation, the candidates for the Royal Poetry Grand Prize would likely appear on this shortlist. If she aimed for the highest honor, her name had to be present here at the very least. She scanned the list, pushing past the crowd. There was. Her name, Felicia, sat clearly among the selected few. Beside her, her friends celebrated. Kathy and Brittany had made the list, and so had Rachel. The group erupted in excited squeals, congratulating one another on their hard work. But the celebration was tainted. Felicia's eyes drifted lower on the list, landing on a name that caused her stomach to churn: Maisie. The realization that Maisie was also in contention for the position of court poet cast a shadow over the moment. Beside her, Rachel's expression darkened. The joy drained from her face, replaced by a haunting look of resignation and lingering pain. Rachel squeezed her own arm, physically grounding herself against the rush of negative emotion. She confessed to Felicia that she still couldn't forgive Maisie. The wound was too deep. She feared she might never forgive her. Rachel explained the torment she endured. Because of Maisie's past actions, the theft of her work, a dull ache returned every time she attempted to write. She acknowledged that to outsiders, her grudge might seem overdramatic, and people often told her to just forget it already. But the trauma persisted. She hadn't written her poetry just so someone could steal it. The theft had taken the happiest time of her life and smeared it with hate and resentment, leaving her creative spirit crippled. Felicia listened, her heart breaking for her friend, understanding that the presence of Maisie on that list was a cruel reminder of the injustice Rachel had suffered. The narrative shifted to the following day. The morning sun cast long shadows as Kevin waited for Felicia, dressed in a disguise to avoid public scrutiny. He wore a dark suit, a fedora pulled low, and round spectacles that obscured his recognizable royal features. Felicia greeted him, asking if he had waited long, to which Kevin replied with his usual easygoing charm. This had become their routine, Kevin disguising himself to take her on small, private dates. As they walked, Felicia's internal monologue churned with guilt. She knew that if she could successfully write a poem for the Royal Poetry Anthology, her engagement to Kevin would become a done deal. Yet she felt unworthy. She didn't want to marry Kevin while she remained someone who couldn't even write properly. The guilt of keeping someone as wonderful as Kevin waiting gnawed at her. Kevin noticed her distraction. He leaned in, asking if something was wrong. Felicia quickly deflected, insisting it was nothing and urging them to continue their walk. Suddenly, a voice cut through the air, dripping with saccharine malice. Felicia, is that you?" Felicia froze. She turned to see two figures approaching. It was Maisie and Cyrus. Panic flared in Felicia's chest. She glanced at Kevin, terrified that his disguise would fail and his identity as the prince would be exposed. She desperately wanted to keep them from finding out. Maisie, dressed in an elaborate gown, clung to Cyrus's arm. She scrutinized Kevin, her eyes narrowing as she asked, "The guy next to Felicia is?" She smirked, suggesting that they were interrupting a date. The air turned thick with awkward tension. Maisie, seemingly concluding that the man was a nobody, let out a sigh of relief, exclaiming, "Safe," internally, while outwardly asking if this was Felicia's new fiancé. She launched into a theatrical display of pity, remarking on how pitiful Felicia was. She gloated that because Cyrus had wanted to be engaged to her, Maisie, Felicia's previous engagement had been broken off. Cyrus, standing beside Maisie, looked uncomfortable but complicit. He added his own salt to the wound, stating, "I think you two suit each other," referring to Felicia and the disguised Kevin. He recounted how he felt safer with someone who truly understands him, a barb clearly aimed at Felicia's past inability to cater to his ego. Felicia stood silently, absorbing the insults. She prepared to leave, signaling that they would be going. But Maisie wasn't finished. She called out, demanding them to wait. She expressed a mocking curiosity about her cousin's new fiancé and, with a wicked gleam in her eye, proposed a double date. Felicia's internal reaction was violent rejection. "Nya dash," she screamed in her mind. She couldn't believe the audacity. After all the smug one-upping and insults, Maisie had the nerve to suggest they spend more time together. Felicia's thoughts raced. Absolutely not. No way. Not happening. However, old habits died hard. Felicia hesitated, her resolve wavering as she remembered the power dynamics of her past. She wondered if it was really that bad to accept, hoping that perhaps Cyrus would be the one to refuse. She waited for him to say no, thinking, he won't. A flashback washed over her. She recalled walking behind Cyrus and Maisie in the past, always the third wheel in her own relationship. They had never once had a date that was just the two of them. Maisie had always tagged along. Felicia realized she had spent her entire previous engagement waiting for Cyrus to draw a line, to ask, what's wrong with them tagging along? But he never did. She had never been able to refuse before. But this time was different. Felicia steeled herself. "This time I won't mess up," she vowed. Just as she prepared to speak, Cyrus muttered a weak apology to Maisie, implying he wouldn't stop her. It seemed history was about to repeat itself. Then, a firm voice cut through the indecision. "I want it to be just me and Felicia." Maisie and Cyrus recoiled in shock. Felicia looked up, startled. It was Kevin. He had stepped forward, his demeanor shifting from passive observer to protective partner. Though he spoke in the guise of a commoner, his tone carried an undeniable authority. Maisie scoffed, but Kevin continued, weaving a narrative that protected his identity while staking his claim. He declared he was in the middle of wooing Felicia. He admitted that while nothing was official yet, he was happy Maisie had mistaken him for her fiancé. He explained that since Felicia had been through a lot with past engagements, he wanted to prove he was worthy to be her partner. Maisie tried to interrupt, demanding to know how they met, dismissing his romantic speech. But Kevin cut her off with a sharp, "Hey, Maisie, cut it out." He looked directly at them, his gaze hidden behind the glasses but his intensity palpable. "This is our date. Why should we have to explain ourselves, to you, of all people?" he challenged. Kevin stated clearly that he wanted a real date where they actually got to know each other. He emphasized that with him, Felicia wouldn't have to endure weird dates where a cousin tagged along. This direct attack on Maisie's past behavior left her flustered and stammering. Kevin delivered the final blow. "Don't interfere," he commanded. He bid them a curt farewell, telling them to get along, and then delivered a simple, irrefutable truth. A date is something two people do. He turned to Felicia, offering his arm. "Shall we go, Felicia?" Felicia, awestruck and grateful, accepted. "Yes." As they walked away, Cyrus was left scratching his head, looking back at them with a mix of confusion and perhaps regret, while Maisie fumed silently. Kevin led Felicia away from the toxic encounter and toward a quieter part of the city. They stopped in front of a charming building with a distinctive architectural style. Felicia looked up, her eyes widening. "What a beautiful food!" she stammered, correcting herself to praise the cafe. It was the Pumpkin Hat, a cafe she used to adore. She turned to Kevin, realizing what he had done. "Kevin, thank you." She admitted that after the mess of her annulled engagement, she had felt she couldn't return to this place without causing trouble or invoking painful memories. It had been a perfect spot for her, but she had abandoned it. Kevin smiled gently. He told her he thought it could be a new place for her to unwind, effectively overriding the bad memories with a new, positive experience. They sat inside, the aroma of tea and pastries filling the air. Felicia let out a long sigh of relaxation. She looked at Kevin, feeling a profound shift in her spirit. "Now I feel like I can write a poem I won't be ashamed to submit," she declared. The encounter with Maisie, rather than breaking her, had been resolved by Kevin's support, freeing her from the ghosts of her past. Kevin encouraged her, saying he was rooting for her to write the poem she wanted to write. Felicia's thoughts drifted back to the academy, and her expression softened into concern. She murmured that she was in a slump too, one that seemed even worse than her own. Kevin immediately understood who she meant. "The girl who had her poem stolen, like you?" Felicia nodded. "I hope Rachel can write a good poem too." She paused, a sudden realization lighting up her face. She apologized for worrying about someone else during their time together, acknowledging that she and Kevin had agreed to aim for the grand prize together. But Kevin interrupted her train of thought with a suggestion. He recalled that Adrian, their night acquaintance, had mentioned a relative who worked with poetry and was interested in talking to poets in training. Kevin looked at her earnestly. "Why don't you go with your poet friends and hear what they have to say?" he proposed. Felicia was stunned. "Huh? Would that be okay?" she asked. Kevin encouraged her to have her friends set a time and go talk to that person. He assured her it was fine, as Adrian had issued the invitation and wouldn't refuse. Felicia looked at him, overwhelmed by his generosity and foresight. You do everything," she whispered. She thanked him, resolving to talk to everyone again. As the scene faded, Felicia pondered the identity of Adrian's relative. She wondered what kind of person connected to poetry could be part of a knight's family. Meanwhile, the final image lingered on Rachel, sitting alone, tears falling from her eyes onto a blank page, still trapped in the darkness of her artistic trauma.